When billionaire Adrian Vale made a decision that cost him everything he'd built, no one understood why, until they learned about the woman in the corner booth who saw right through his fortune and straight into the emptiness he'd been hiding for years. This is the story of how one simple act of kindness rewrote a man's entire existence. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, hit that like button. Now, let's begin. The restaurant was called Meridian, and it sat on the corner of 5th and Morrison like a jewel box, all warm amber lighting and polished mahogany. The kind of place where silverware didn't clatter and conversations never rose above a cultured murmur. It was the sort of establishment where reservations were made weeks in advance, where the sommelier knew your preferences before you walked through the door, and where being seen mattered almost as much as the food itself. Adrian Vale sat alone at table 12, a prime spot near the window overlooking the city's glittering skyline. At 32, he carried himself with the particular stillness of someone who'd learned early that every movement was watched, every word weighed. His suit was custom-tailored, midnight blue with subtle pinstripes that caught the light just so, and his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe, whispered old money even though his fortune was decidedly new. He'd made his first million at 24, his first 100 million by 28. Now, his venture capital firm commanded enough influence to make or break entire industries with a single investment decision. Tech magazines called him a visionary. Business journals dubbed him the Silent King for his notorious refusal to give interviews. His competitors feared him. His partners respected him. His son, Adrian, pushed that thought away, checking his watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 7:42. Miranda was now 42 minutes late. He reached for his water glass, the crystal cool against his palm, and took a measured sip. Around him, the restaurant hummed with quiet prosperity. A couple's 2 tables over laughed softly at some private joke, their hands intertwined across the white tablecloth. Near the bar, a group of colleagues celebrated a promotion with champagne that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The pianist in the corner played something classical and forgettable. Everyone here existed in pairs or groups, Adrian noticed. Everyone except him. His phone buzzed, finally. But the message that lit up his screen wasn't an apology or an ETA. It was an excuse dressed up in the language of regret that didn't quite reach sincerity. Adrian, I'm so sorry. Emergency meeting ran over. You know how it is? Rain check, XOM. He stared at the message for a long moment, his expression unchanged. Then he set the phone face down on the table and signaled for the waiter. Sir? The young man appeared instantly, professionally attentive. Just the check, please. I won't be staying. Of course, sir. Right away. Adrian sat back, his gaze drifting to the empty chair across from him. It wasn't the first time someone had canceled on him. It wouldn't be the last. In his world, people's time was currency, and someone, was always more valuable than the commitment they'd made. He understood it. He even practiced it himself when necessary. Understanding it didn't make the empty chair any less accusatory. The waiter returned with the leather portfolio containing a bill for the sparkling water and breadbasket Adrian hadn't touched. He signed it without looking at the total, added a generous tip that was more habit than kindness, and stood. No one looked up as he prepared to leave. No one ever did. In a room full of people who prided themselves on knowing who mattered, Adrian Vale had mastered the art of being invisible in plain sight. He preferred it that way. Attention meant expectations, and expectations meant vulnerability. He'd learned that lesson early, and he'd learned it well. Adrian was reaching for his coat when a voice stopped him, soft, unhurried, with a warmth that felt out of place in Meridian's carefully curated atmosphere. Excuse me? He turned. She sat 3 tables away, partially hidden by one of the restaurant's ornamental pillars. He hadn't noticed her before, hadn't noticed much of anything beyond his own reflection in the window and the rhythmic checking of his phone. The woman was perhaps 30, maybe a year or 2 younger, where everyone else in Meridian wore their affluence like armor, designer labels, statement jewelry, the confident posture of people who'd never worried about next month's bills. She seemed almost apologetically out of place. Her sweater was clean but faded, the kind you found at department store clearance sales. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, a few strands escaping to frame a face that was more interesting than conventionally pretty. High cheekbones, full lips, and eyes that carried the particular weight of someone who'd seen enough of life to stop pretending it was easy. She was alone too, Adrian realized. A single plate sat before her, half finished. A worn paperback rested beside her water glass. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she continued, her voice carrying that same gentle quality, "but I noticed you're leaving and, well, I hate eating alone. Would you like to join me?" The question hung in the air between them, so unexpected that for a moment Adrian forgot how to respond. Around them, the restaurant continued its quiet symphony of clinking glasses and muted conversation, oblivious to the small rupture this woman had just created in the evening's fabric. He stopped, uncertain. When was the last time someone had surprised him? When was the last time anything had surprised him? She seemed to sense his confusion and offered a small smile, self-deprecating and warm. "I know it's strange. I promise I don't usually do this. It's just—" She gestured to her table, to the empty chair across from her that mirrored his own abandoned setting. "It's a Tuesday night, and I'm eating a meal I probably shouldn't have spent money on, in a place I definitely can't afford, because sometimes you need to pretend life isn't as hard as it is. And I thought maybe—" She trailed off, shrugging. "Maybe you looked like you could use a break from pretending too." Adrian stood frozen, his coat half pulled from the chair. Every instinct he'd honed over 15 years of business negotiations told him to smile politely, decline graciously, and walk away. Strangers didn't offer seats without agendas. People didn't extend kindness without expecting something in return. That was the fundamental equation of human interaction, at least in his experience. But something in her eyes, a lack of calculation, a presence without pressure, made him pause. She wasn't looking at him the way people usually did. There was no recognition in her gaze, no subtle shift in posture that indicated she knew who he was or what he was worth. She'd offered him a seat the same way someone might offer an umbrella in the rain, a simple gesture born from understanding what it meant to stand alone in a storm. "Forget it," she said quickly, mistaking his silence for rejection. "That was weird. I'm sorry. Enjoy your evening." She turned back to her plate, and Adrian watched something close off in her expression, a small disappointment she'd clearly had practice hiding. He should leave. He knew he should leave. Instead, he heard himself say, "I'd like that." Her head lifted, surprise flickering across her features. "Joining you," Adrian clarified, surprised at himself. "If the offer still stands." The smile that transformed her face was nothing like the calculated expressions he navigated daily. The smiles that meant yes when they meant no, that promised partnership while planning betrayal. This was unguarded, genuine, like watching sunrise break across unfamiliar territory. "It does," she said. "Definitely still stands." Adrian picked up his water glass and made his way across the restaurant's carefully maintained distance. The walk felt longer than it should have, as if he were crossing more than just 3 tables, as if each step carried him further from something familiar and closer to something he couldn't yet name. He set his glass down and lowered himself into the chair across from her, the leather creaking softly under his weight. "Thank you," he said, and meant it in a way he hadn't meant anything in longer than he could remember. "Maya," she offered, extending her hand. Her grip was firm, her palm slightly calloused, the hands of someone who worked with them, who knew the value of effort. "Adrian." "Nice to meet you, Adrian." She gestured to her plate, where what looked like salmon and asparagus sat partially eaten. "I can't promise the company is worth the food, but at least neither of us has to feel pathetic eating alone." "I don't think you could look pathetic if you tried," Adrian said, then immediately wondered where that had come from. He didn't do spontaneous compliments. He didn't do spontaneous anything. Maya laughed, a real laugh, not the polite tittering that usually greeted his rare attempts at charm. "You haven't seen me at 3 in the morning trying to figure out my taxes. Peak pathetic. Tax season is months away. I like to mentally prepare for disappointment well in advance." Adrian felt the corner of his mouth lift. When was the last time he'd smiled without intention, without strategy? "That's actually very practical. That's what I keep telling myself." She took a sip of her water, studying him with open curiosity that should have felt invasive, but somehow didn't. "So what brings you to Meridian on a Tuesday night? Hot date?" The question was light, conversational, but Adrian felt something in his chest tighten anyway. Something like that, he said, his tone carefully neutral. It didn't work out. Understanding softened her expression. Ah, hence the almost exit. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's, He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound as hollow as he felt. It's standard. People cancel. Things come up. Sure, Maya agreed, but something in her voice suggested she didn't quite believe him. But that doesn't make it feel less shitty when you're sitting there waiting. The bluntness of it startled him into honesty. No, Adrian admitted. It doesn't. They sat in silence for a moment, not the awkward quiet of strangers grasping for common ground, but something more comfortable. The kind of silence that suggested words weren't always necessary. A waiter appeared, young and efficient. Sir, would you like to order? Adrian glanced at the menu he hadn't opened, then at Maya's plate. I'll have what she's having. The pan-seared salmon with lemon butter and roasted asparagus? Yes. Excellent choice, sir. And to drink? Water is fine. The waiter nodded and disappeared, leaving them alone again. You didn't even look at the menu, Maya observed, amusement coloring her voice. You chose well, Adrian said simply. I trust your judgment. Something shifted in her expression, surprise maybe, or pleasure at being trusted so easily. That's dangerous. For all you know, I have terrible taste. Do you? In salmon? No. In most other things. She tilted her head, considering. Jury's still out. I'll take my chances. Maya leaned back in her chair, her fingers playing absently with the stem of her water glass. So tell me, Adrian with no last name, what do you do? When you're not being stood up at fancy restaurants, I mean. The question was inevitable, but Adrian still felt himself tense. This was the moment where everything usually changed, where people's expressions shifted, where calculations began, where genuine curiosity transformed into strategic interest. I work in finance, he said, which was technically true in the way that calling the ocean damp was technically accurate. Ah, Maya nodded. Let me guess. Long hours, high stress, lots of people in suits saying things like synergy and circle back. Despite himself, Adrian laughed. That's actually a perfect summary. My ex worked in corporate, Maya explained. I learned the language, never learned to like it, but I learned it. Ex? Adrian wasn't sure why he asked, only that he wanted to know. Yeah, she said it simply, without drama. Ended about 2 years ago. He wanted someone who fit his world better, someone who looked good at company parties and didn't ask uncomfortable questions about where the money came from. Uncomfortable questions? Maya met his eyes directly. Questions about ethics, about whether profit justifies harm, that sort of thing. Adrian felt something sharp lodge in his chest. And he didn't appreciate that? He appreciated my ability to make him feel important, Maya said, her voice carrying the flat tone of old hurt. He didn't appreciate me making him think about whether being important was the same as being good. The waiter returned with Adrian's salmon, setting it before him with practiced elegance. Adrian thanked him automatically, but his attention remained on Maya. What about you? He asked, redirecting before she could probe further into territory he wasn't ready to navigate. What do you do? I teach, Maya said. 3rd grade. Lincoln Elementary, over on the east side. That must be... Adrian paused, searching for the right word. He knew nothing about teaching, about children, about the patient cultivation of young minds. His own son had nannies, tutors, a private school where tuition cost more than Maya probably made in 6 months. Rewarding. It is, Maya agreed. It's also exhausting, underpaid, and some days I wonder if I'm actually making a difference or just putting band-aids on systemic failures. But then Marcus finally reads a full sentence without help, or Sophia stops pulling her hair long enough to finish a math problem, or Jamal draws me a picture of his family where everyone's smiling. And I remember why I do it. She spoke about her students with the same unguarded warmth she'd offered him. No pretense, no performance. Just genuine care worn openly, as if she'd never learned that vulnerability could be weaponized. You remember all their names? Adrian observed. Of course, they're my kids. Maya cut a piece of her salmon, her movements economical. I mean, not literally, but I see them more hours a week than most of their parents do. I watch them grow, struggle, triumph over things that seem small to adults, but are mountains to them. How could I not remember their names? Adrian thought about his son, 7 years old now, whose schedule he managed through an assistant, whose parent-teacher conferences he attended via video call when urgent business didn't interfere. Did he know his teacher's name? Did the teacher know anything real about him? The thought sat uncomfortable and heavy. "You're lucky," he said quietly. Maya looked up, surprise evident. Lucky? To have work that matters like that, to see the impact directly. She studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. What you do matters too, doesn't it? Finance keeps the world running. Finance makes the world run, Adrian corrected, his tone more bitter than he'd intended. Whether it's running in the right direction is debatable. Okay, now I'm really curious, Maya said, leaning forward slightly. What kind of finance makes a person sound that disillusioned? Adrian picked up his fork, more for something to do with his hands than from hunger. The kind where every decision comes down to numbers on a spreadsheet, and it's easy to forget those numbers represent people, lives, communities. But you don't forget, Maya said, not a question, an observation. Not forgetting doesn't mean I've done anything about it. The admission surprised him. He didn't talk like this, didn't reveal doubt or uncertainty. Weakness was currency his competitors would spend without hesitation. Even Miranda, who he'd been dating, if you could call their sporadic, convenience-based dinners dating, knew only the version of him that was confident, controlled, impenetrable. But something about Maya's presence, about the way she listened without judgment, without agenda, made honesty feel less dangerous than usual. Why not? She asked simply. Because changing the system requires risking everything you've built within it, Adrian said. And most days, I'm not sure I'm brave enough for that. Maya set down her fork, her full attention on him now. Can I tell you something? You can tell me to mind my own business if you want. Please. I don't think it's about bravery, she said carefully. I think it's about knowing what you're afraid of losing, and whether what you're keeping is worth what it's costing you. Adrian felt the words land somewhere deep, in the place he'd learned to ignore, the place that still woke him at 3 a.m. with the sensation of drowning in a life that looked perfect from the outside. He stopped, started again. That's uncomfortably perceptive. Maya smiled, but there was sadness in it. I've had a lot of practice losing things. You develop a sense for what's worth holding on to. Like what? She considered the question, her gaze distant. Honesty. Kindness, even when it's not returned. The ability to sleep at night knowing I didn't compromise who I am for comfort. It doesn't pay the bills as well as other choices might, but, she shrugged, I can look at myself in the mirror? Adrian thought about his own reflection that morning, in the bathroom of his penthouse apartment, all marble and strategic lighting designed to erase flaws. He'd seen a successful man, respected and feared in equal measure. He hadn't seen himself in years. Your date, Maya said suddenly, as if the thought had just occurred to her. The one who canceled. Was she someone important? She thought so, Adrian said. We both did, maybe. She's brilliant. Runs a tech startup that's revolutionizing data security. We made sense on paper. On paper, Maya repeated. But not in person? We barely knew each other. 3 months of strategically scheduled dinners, conversations about market trends and portfolio diversification. I couldn't tell you her favorite color or what makes her laugh or... He trailed off, recognizing how pathetic it sounded. We had chemistry in a spreadsheet. Maya's laugh was gentle, not mocking. That's the saddest thing I've heard all week, and I had a student tell me his goldfish died. How do I compete with dead goldfish? You don't. Mr. Bubbles was apparently beloved. She paused, then added more seriously, Can I ask you something? Adrian nodded, realizing he'd say yes to almost anything she asked, another unfamiliar sensation. What was the last thing that made you happy? Not satisfied, not successful, actually happy. The question should have been easy. It wasn't. Adrian sat there, fork suspended halfway to his mouth, searching through memories like files in a cabinet. Business victories, financial milestones, property acquisitions, achievements accumulated like coins, counted and recounted, but never spent on anything real. I don't remember, he finally admitted. The confession hung between them, stark and vulnerable. Maya didn't look away, didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. She just nodded, as if his answer confirmed something she'd already suspected. Then maybe, she said gently, maybe it's time to figure out what that looks like. What happiness looks like for you, not for the spreadsheet version. Is that what you're doing? Adrian asked. Here, at a restaurant you admitted you can't afford, eating alone on a Tuesday night? Yeah, Maya said, and there was no shame in it, no defensiveness. Sometimes happiness is giving yourself permission to exist somewhere beautiful, even if you can't justify the expense. Sometimes it's sitting with the discomfort of being alone and deciding that's okay, that you're enough, even without someone across the table validating your existence. And tonight? She smiled, real and warm. Tonight I'm realizing that sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need. I was sitting here feeling sorry for myself, and then you showed up looking like you needed kindness even more than I did. So now we're both a little less alone, and that's actually happy. Adrian felt something crack in his chest, not painful, but like ice thawing after a long winter. When was the last time someone had seen him as someone who needed kindness? When was the last time he'd let anyone close enough to see? They talked for another hour, their plates long cleared, the restaurant beginning to empty around them. They talked about small things and large things, Maya's students and their small triumphs, Adrian's carefully edited stories about business challenges, her dreams of writing a children's book someday, his admission that he'd once wanted to be an architect before his father convinced him that art was indulgence and finance was responsibility. You still could, Maya said when he mentioned the abandoned dream. Be an architect? Design something. Create something. Who says you can't? I'm 32. I run a billion-dollar firm. I don't have time for happiness, Maya finished. Yeah, I'm starting to see the pattern. Adrian wanted to argue, to explain how the world worked, how responsibility and leadership meant sacrifice. But sitting across from this woman who had so little compared to his abundance, yet seemed so much richer in the ways that mattered, the arguments felt hollow. I check my watch, he said abruptly. Maya blinked at the non sequitur. What? Earlier you asked what I do. I check my watch, constantly. You noticed, didn't you? She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I did, yeah, but I figured... It's not about the time, Adrian interrupted. It's about control, discomfort. When I don't know what to do or say, when something feels too real or too close, I check my watch. It gives me a reason to look away, to create distance. It's a tell I developed years ago and never broke. Maya absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. That's remarkably self-aware. Self-awareness doesn't equal change. No, she agreed, but it's the first step. Around them, the waitstaff was beginning the subtle ballet of closing, clearing tables, dimming lights, the pianist playing his final song of the evening. Adrian glanced at his watch, actually needing to check this time, not avoiding anything, and was startled to discover it was nearly 11. 3 hours. He'd been sitting here for 3 hours, and it felt like minutes. They're closing, Maya observed, following his gaze to the discreetly hovering waiter. They are. Neither of them moved. I should, Maya started. Yes, Adrian agreed, still not standing. Finally, they both rose, gathering their things with the awkward awareness of a moment ending. Adrian caught the waiter's attention, gesturing for the check. Oh no, Maya said quickly, we're splitting this. I invited you, but I've got it, Adrian said, his tone brooking no argument. Adrian, I can't let you... You gave me your evening, he interrupted gently. You gave me conversation that didn't feel like negotiation and kindness, that didn't expect anything in return. That's worth far more than dinner. He could see her warring with pride and practicality. Practicality won, but barely. Thank you, she said quietly. Thank you. The check came and went, Adrian signing it without looking, adding a tip that would probably cover the waiter's rent. They walked toward the entrance together, slow steps that felt like reluctance. Outside, the city sprawled before them, lights and traffic, and the endless motion of lives intersecting and diverging. The air was cool, carrying the first whisper of autumn. "I'm that way," Maya said, pointing left toward the subway entrance. "My car's being brought around," Adrian said, then heard himself add, "Can I give you a ride?" Maya hesitated. "That's kind, but I don't want to take you out of your way." "You couldn't possibly." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. Yes. Thank you." They waited in silence, comfortable now, as the valet brought around Adrian's car, a sleek black Mercedes that cost more than most people's houses. Maya's eyes widened slightly when she saw it, but she didn't comment, just slid into the passenger seat when Adrian held the door open. "Where to?" he asked once they were both settled, the car's interior cocooning them in leather and quiet luxury. Maya rattled off an address in a neighborhood Adrian recognized as decidedly not upscale. He input it into the navigation without comment and pulled into traffic. They drove in silence for a while, the city sliding past the windows like a film reel. Maya gazed out at the streets, her expression unreadable, while Adrian navigated turns with practiced ease. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian said finally. "Seems fair. I've been interrogating you all night." "Why did you really invite me to sit with you?" Maya turned from the window, considering him. "You want the truth?" "Always." "You looked like I felt," she said simply, alone in a room full of people, going through the motions because that's what you're supposed to do, but somewhere deep down knowing it's all performance. And I thought maybe if we were alone together, it would feel less empty. Did it work? She smiled. Yeah, it did. They lapsed back into silence, but it was different now, charged with something unspoken, with the awareness that they'd somehow become important to each other in the span of a single evening. Too soon, the navigation announced their arrival. Adrian pulled up to a modest apartment building, older but well-maintained, the kind of place where people knew their neighbors and package theft was a community concern. Maya reached for the door handle, then paused. "Thank you for tonight," she said. "For taking a chance on a stranger's invitation. For being honest. For being you, whoever that is under all the armor." Adrian felt his throat tighten. "Thank you for seeing someone worth sitting with." She held his gaze, and in that moment, Adrian felt more seen than in any of the countless meetings, presentations, or strategic dinners he'd navigated in his career. Not as Adrian Vale, the silent king, the billionaire, the man whose approval could make or break dreams. Just as Adrian. Just as human. "I hope," Maya started, then stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind. Say it." "I hope you find it," she said softly. "Whatever would make you happy. Whatever would let you sleep at night. I hope you find the courage to choose it, even if it costs everything." Before he could respond, before he could ask how she saw through him so completely, she was out of the car, closing the door gently behind her. She gave him a small wave through the window, then turned and walked into her building. Adrian sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, watching the light come on in a third-floor window. He could see her silhouette moving around, small, efficient movements in what was clearly a small space. Two worlds, he thought. They lived in two completely different worlds. And yet somehow, for 3 hours in a restaurant that existed between those worlds, they'd found common ground. Adrian checked his watch. 11:47. He should head home, get some sleep before tomorrow's early meetings, maintain the schedule that kept his life running smoothly. Instead, he sat in his car outside Maya Carter's apartment building, the city pulsing around him, and wondered what it meant that a stranger's kindness had cracked something in him he thought was permanently sealed. His phone buzzed. Miranda, probably. A follow-up to her cancellation, maybe guilt disguised as concern. He didn't check it. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Adrian Vale didn't want to know what came next, what strategy to deploy, what response would best position him for advantage. He just wanted to sit with the unfamiliar warmth of having been seen, truly seen, by someone who asked for nothing in return. Eventually, he put the car in gear and pulled away from the curb. The city swallowed him back into its flow, anonymous, alone, unchanged to any outside observer. But as Adrian drove through streets that blurred into familiar routes toward an apartment that had never felt like home, he carried with him the echo of Maya's question, What would make you happy? And for the first time in years, he wanted to find an answer. The night stretched before him, full of possibility and uncertainty, and Adrian Vale, who had built an empire on eliminating uncertainty, found himself hoping that tomorrow would bring another chance to sit across from someone who saw through his carefully constructed walls. Someone who reminded him that beneath the armor, beneath the achievements and the isolation, there was still a person worth knowing, still someone who might, with the right kind of kindness, remember how to be human again. The morning arrived with the aggressive punctuality that characterized Adrian's life. His alarm at 5:30, the pre-programmed coffee maker gurgling to life in the kitchen, the newspaper delivered to his door with the precision of atomic clockwork. He went through his routine mechanically: shower, suit, the careful selection of cufflinks that signaled competence without ostentation. By 6:45, he was in his car, navigating toward the glass tower that housed Vale Capital with the same focused efficiency he brought to everything. Everything except the thoughts that kept circling back to a third-floor window and a woman who'd seen straight through him. His assistant, Jennifer, was already at her desk when he arrived. She always was. Her dedication to staying 3 steps ahead of his needs bordering on prescient. She handed him his schedule without looking up from her tablet. Morning briefing at 8 with the acquisitions team, conference call with Tokyo at 9:30, lunch meeting with the Hartley Group at noon, and you have the Riverside Development Review at 3. Also, Miranda Chen called twice already this morning. Adrian accepted the schedule, scanning it without really seeing it. What did Miranda want? To apologize for last night and reschedule for Friday. Jennifer finally glanced up, her sharp eyes assessing. Should I confirm? He should say yes. Miranda was smart, ambitious, exactly the kind of partner who made sense in his carefully calibrated life. Their relationship was convenient, uncomplicated by messy emotions or unrealistic expectations. Tell her I'll have to check my calendar and get back to her. Jennifer's eyebrows rose fractionally, the most surprise she ever showed. You want me to tell Miranda Chen, who's called twice before 8 in the morning, that you need to check your calendar? Yes? Noted. She made a notation on her tablet, her expression carefully neutral. Anything else you need before the briefing? Adrian hesitated, then heard himself ask, Do you know where Lincoln Elementary is, east side of the city? Now both eyebrows rose. The public school. Yes? I can look it up. Why? No reason, just curious. Jennifer studied him for a moment longer, clearly wanting to probe but knowing better than to push. I'll have the address for you within the hour. Thank you. Adrian moved toward his office, the corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city he'd conquered. He stood at the glass, coffee cooling in his hand, and thought about the view from Maya's apartment, what she saw when she looked out her window, what kind of world stretched before her each morning. His phone buzzed. A text from Marcus, his 7-year-old son. Daddy, I'm in the play. Can you come? The message was followed by 3 theater mask emojis that his nanny had clearly helped him select. Adrian felt the familiar twist of guilt. When had the play been announced? Had there been a notice he'd missed, forwarded by Jennifer and lost in the constant flood of information? He typed back, When is it? The response came quickly. Next Thursday, 7 p.m., Adrian pulled up his calendar. Next Thursday evening was the reception for potential investors in the Riverside development, a crucial event he'd been planning for months, where he needed to be charming and confident and everything that justified their faith in his vision. He stared at the conflict for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. Then he typed, I'll be there. Can't wait to see you perform. The responding emoji parade, stars and hearts and more theater masks, made something in his chest ache. Mr. Vale? Jennifer appeared in the doorway. The acquisitions team is ready. Adrian pocketed his phone and followed her to the conference room, where 3 of his senior analysts waited with laptops open and expressions of barely contained excitement. They were young, brilliant, hungry, the kind of people who saw opportunity in every market fluctuation and victory in every successful arbitrage. They were him 10 years ago. Good morning, Adrian said, taking his seat at the head of the table. What do we have? Rebecca Chen, no relation to Miranda, pulled up a presentation on the wall-mounted screen. The Riverside development opportunity we've been tracking. The current owners are motivated to sell, The zoning is favorable, and our projections show a potential return of 300% over 5 years. Adrian studied the numbers, the carefully constructed models that transformed human spaces into profit margins. What's the current use? Mixed residential and small business, Tom Bradford answered, pulling up photographs. About 200 units of affordable housing, some street-level retail, bodega, laundromat, family-owned restaurant, that sort of thing. The buildings are old, outdated, not generating anywhere near their potential value. The photograph showed weathered brick, fire escapes zigzagging down facades, laundry hanging from windows. People lived there. Families. The kind of people who probably shopped at bodegas because they were convenient and cheap, who needed laundromats because they didn't have in-unit washers, who ate at family restaurants because the food reminded them of home. People like Maya probably knew. What happens to the current residents? Adrian asked. The three analysts exchanged glances. It was Sarah Kim who answered, her voice careful. That's not really our concern. The new owners would handle relocation. Our role is just the financing and development partnership. Not our concern, Adrian repeated slowly. 200 families displaced, and it's not our concern. Tom shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with respect, we're an investment firm. Our responsibility is to our investors, to maximize returns. If we start making decisions based on social impact rather than financial viability, we what? Adrian interrupted. We become less profitable? Or we become less willing to profit from other people's displacement? The silence that followed was heavy with confusion and concern. This wasn't how Adrian Vale operated. He was known for his analytical precision, his ability to separate emotion from strategy, his ruthless efficiency in identifying opportunity regardless of optics. Rebecca recovered first. Are you saying you want us to pass on Riverside? I'm saying I want a full impact assessment, Adrian said. I want to know exactly what happens to those 200 families, where they'll go, what they'll pay, whether they'll be able to stay in their neighborhoods, keep their kids in the same schools. I want to know about the businesses, how long they've operated, whether they're the only services in the area, what happens to the community if they close. That's going to take time, Sarah said carefully, and resources. The deal timeline can be extended. Adrian stood, gathering his materials. I want the assessment on my desk by Monday, and I want alternatives, development scenarios that don't require complete displacement, creative solutions. Sir, Tom ventured, his voice uncertain. With respect, that's not really what we do. We identify opportunities, we structure deals, we profit from human displacement without asking whether we should, Adrian finished. I know. I'm asking us to do something different. He left them sitting there, bewildered and concerned, probably already composing messages to each other about whether their boss had suffered some kind of breakdown. Maybe he had. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and decisions, but Adrian found his attention wandering in ways it never had before. During the Tokyo call, he caught himself wondering what time it was in Maya's classroom, whether Marcus was learning the same lessons, whether either of them felt seen by the systems meant to serve them. At the Hartley Group lunch, while discussing merger opportunities over $60 stakes, he thought about Maya admitting she'd spent money she couldn't afford because sometimes you needed to pretend life wasn't as hard as it was. He made it until 2:30 before he did something unprecedented. Jennifer, he said, appearing in her doorway. Clear my afternoon. She looked up, stylus frozen mid-notation. I'm sorry, what? The Riverside Review, everything after. Clear it. Sir, the Riverside Review is... I know what it is. Reschedule it. Jennifer's expression cycled through confusion, concern, and finally professional acceptance. May I ask where you'll be, in case something urgent comes up? Adrian paused, then said simply, I'll have my phone. He was in his car before he could question the impulse, the address Jennifer had provided earlier, already programmed into his navigation. Lincoln Elementary was a 40-minute drive in midday traffic through neighborhoods that grew progressively less familiar, less polished, more real. He'd built his empire on understanding markets, on seeing value where others saw only risk. But sitting at stoplights in areas where chain stores gave way to local shops with hand-painted signs, where the people on the sidewalks looked nothing like the people in his office building, Adrian realized how narrow his understanding had become. Lincoln Elementary was a brick building that had seen better decades, surrounded by a chain-link fence, and a playground with equipment that looked like it predated modern safety standards. Adrian parked across the street, feeling conspicuous in his Mercedes among the modest sedans and aging minivans. He checked his watch, 2:57. School let out at 3, according to the information Jennifer had provided. What was he doing here? What possible justification could he offer for showing up at Maya's workplace unannounced, for inserting himself into her life based on one evening of conversation? He should leave. This was inappropriate, possibly disturbing, definitely outside any reasonable bounds of normal behavior. He was reaching for the ignition when the school doors opened and children began spilling out, a chaotic river of backpacks and youthful energy. Parents materialized along the fence, waving and calling names, and Adrian watched the daily reunion with something like fascination. Then he saw her. Maya emerged with a small group of students, her arms full of art supplies, her ponytail slightly askew, looking harried and happy in equal measure. She was helping a little girl with a broken backpack strap, tying it into a makeshift knot while simultaneously answering questions from two boys who seemed to be arguing about something involving dinosaurs. She looked nothing like she had last night. No careful composure, no guarded politeness. She looked alive, engaged, completely present in the messy reality of her work. Adrian found himself getting out of the car before conscious thought could interfere. Maya spotted him when he was halfway across the street, her expression cycling through surprise, confusion, and something that might have been pleasure before settling on amused bewilderment. "Adrian?" She handed off the art supplies to a parent volunteer and moved toward the fence. "What are you doing here?" The children with her turned to stare, their curiosity naked and immediate. Adrian realized he had no prepared answer, no smooth explanation. "I wanted to see you." "You wanted to see me," Maya repeated. "So you came to my elementary school in the middle of the day?" "When you say it like that, it sounds strange." "It is strange." But she was smiling, that same unguarded warmth from last night. "Give me 5 minutes to get everyone sorted?" Adrian nodded and watched as Maya returned to her students, making sure each one connected with their designated adult, solving last-minute crises with the calm efficiency of someone who'd orchestrated this chaos hundreds of times. The little girl with the broken backpack strap hugged her fiercely before running off, and Maya knelt down to return the embrace with obvious affection. Finally, the crowd thinned, and Maya approached the fence, slipping through the gate to stand beside him on the sidewalk. "Hi," she said. "Hi." They stood there for a moment, grinning at each other like teenagers, until Maya laughed and shook her head. "This is surreal, you showing up here." "I can go," Adrian offered. "I didn't mean to. I should have called or—" "No," Maya interrupted. "I'm glad you came. Surprised, definitely. A little concerned about your ability to understand appropriate boundaries." She softened the words with a smile. "But glad." "I don't usually do this," Adrian said. "Show up at elementary schools unannounced." "Show up anywhere unannounced. I plan everything, schedule everything, control every variable I can." Maya studied him, her dark eyes seeing too much. "So why didn't you this time?" "Because I couldn't stop thinking about last night," Adrian admitted. "About what you said. About finding courage to choose happiness, even if it costs everything. And I realized I didn't know when I'd see you again, and the idea of waiting, of returning to my regular schedule and letting you become just a memory." He trailed off, feeling exposed in the afternoon sunlight. "I wanted to choose something that made me happy instead of something that made sense." Maya's expression softened into something tender and sad. "And showing up here made you happy?" "Seeing you again made me happy." She looked away, but not before he caught the flush coloring her cheeks. "You don't even know me." "I'd like to," Adrian said simply, "if you'll let me." A bell rang inside the school building, some administrative signal that made Maya check her watch. "I have to be back in 20 minutes for afternoon prep. But there's a coffee shop 2 blocks over. Nothing fancy, but—" "Perfect," Adrian said. "Can I drive us?" Maya glanced at his car, then down at her faded sweater and practical shoes. That seems like a metaphor waiting to happen, but sure. They drove in comfortable silence, Maya directing him through side streets to a small cafe called Rosie's that looked like it had been serving the neighborhood for decades. The interior was worn but clean, with mismatched furniture and the kind of genuine character that came from years of actual use rather than designer intention. Adrian had never been anywhere like it. They ordered at the counter, coffee for him, tea for her, and found a table near the window. Maya wrapped her hands around her mug, studying him with open curiosity. "So," she said, "Adrian from finance who shows up at elementary schools. Tell me something true." "Something true?" "Something you don't usually say. Something real." Adrian considered the question, the weight of her attention making honesty feel both dangerous and necessary. "I have a son," he said finally. "His name is Marcus. He's 7 years old, and he's in a school play next Thursday, and until this morning I was planning to miss it for a business reception." Maya absorbed this, her expression carefully neutral. "And now? Now I'm going to the play and rescheduling the reception." "What changed?" "You asked me what made me happy," Adrian said. "And I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just because it mattered to someone I love, rather than because it advanced some strategic goal. Marcus is 7. How many more school plays will he have? How many more times will he send me emojis asking if I'll come?" His throat tightened. "I've been measuring my life in deals and dollars, and I'm going to blink and realize I missed everything that actually mattered." Maya reached across the table, her hand covering his. The touch was brief, platonic, but Adrian felt it like electricity. "I think," she said gently, "that realizing it means you haven't missed everything yet." "His mother died," Adrian continued, the words coming easier now. "When he was 2, car accident. And I threw myself into work because it was easier than grief, easier than learning how to be a single parent, easier than admitting I had no idea how to raise a child alone. So I hired people, good people, people who care about him, but they're not me. And I've been absent in every way that matters while being physically present, just enough to convince myself I'm doing my job." "Adrian, you talk about your students like they're yours," he said. "You remember their names, their struggles, their small victories. I had to check my calendar this morning to remember when my own son's play was happening." Maya was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What would you do differently, if you could start over?" "I'd be there," Adrian said immediately. "Not just physically, but actually present. I'd learn what he's interested in instead of assuming tutors and enrichment programs are enough. I'd ask questions and listen to answers," and he stopped, overwhelmed by the weight of his own failures. "I'd be the father he deserves instead of the one I've been." "You can't start over," Maya said. "None of us can. But you can start now, today. That choice is always available." "Is it that simple?" "Simple? No. Possible? Yes." She took a sip of her tea, her gaze distant. "I told you about my ex last night. What I didn't tell you was that staying with him would have been easier. He had money, stability, a career path that promised comfort. Leaving meant starting over with nothing, meant going back to barely making rent and worrying about bills. But I couldn't look at myself anymore if I stayed. Couldn't pretend that comfort was worth compromising who I was." "Do you regret it?" "Leaving?" Maya shook her head. "Never. I regret the time I wasted trying to convince myself that his version of success was enough. But I don't regret choosing myself." Adrian thought about his empire, the carefully constructed life that looked so impressive from outside and felt so hollow from within. What if choosing yourself means dismantling everything you've built? "Then maybe what you've built wasn't stable to begin with," Maya said. "Maybe it was just impressive scaffolding around an empty space." The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like relief. Someone finally naming the truth he'd been avoiding. "I don't know how to be different," Adrian admitted. "I've spent 15 years becoming this version of myself. It's all I know how to do." You came here today?" Maya pointed out. "You changed your schedule, drove across the city, did something impulsive because it felt right. That's different." "That's terrifying." "Yeah," she agreed, smiling. "Usually is." They sat in silence for a while, watching the neighborhood move past the window. This wasn't Adrian's world. The people here dressed differently, moved differently, carried themselves with the particular weariness of those for whom survival was work and luxury was fantasy. But sitting across from Maya in this worn cafe, drinking mediocre coffee, and having the most honest conversation he'd had in years, Adrian felt more grounded than he had in any boardroom or penthouse. "Tell me about your students," he said suddenly. "The ones you mentioned last night, Marcus and Sophia and Jamal?" Maya's face lit up. and for the next 20 minutes, she painted pictures of 8-year-olds with detail and affection that made them vivid and real. Marcus, who struggled with reading but had finally connected sounds and symbols into meaning. Sophia, who pulled her hair when anxious but was slowly learning other coping strategies. Jamal, whose home life was chaos, but whose drawings showed stunning emotional intelligence. They're all fighting battles no one sees, Maya said. Marcus's dad works 3 jobs and can barely stay awake during parent conferences. Sophia's mom has untreated anxiety and can't afford therapy. Jamal's grandmother is raising him because both parents are in prison, and she's doing her best, but she's 73 and exhausted. How do you do it? Adrian asked. How do you show up every day knowing you can't fix the systemic problems, can't give them what they really need? Because I can give them something, Maya said simply. I can give them 6 hours a day where someone sees them, values them, believes they're capable of more than their circumstances suggest. I can teach them to read so they have doorways to other worlds. I can show them kindness so they know it exists. It's not enough. It's never enough. But it's not nothing. Adrian thought about his meeting that morning, about 200 families becoming collateral damage in someone else's profit margin. The Riverside development, he said. Do you know it? Maya's expression grew wary. The neighborhood over on Riverside and 23rd? Yes, my firm is considering investing in a development project there. Complete redevelopment. Tear down the existing buildings, build luxury condos, and upscale retail. Displacing everyone who lives there now. Yes, Maya's jaw tightened. That's where Jamal lives, and 3 other students in my school. Those are their homes, their community. Where do you think they'll go when their rent quadruples? Where do you think their grandmother will find affordable housing that accepts her Section 8 voucher and keeps Jamal in his same school? The accusation in her voice was clear, and Adrian felt it land like a physical blow. I didn't know. Would it have mattered if you did? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. A day ago, Adrian knew the answer would have been no. The deal would have been just numbers, just opportunity, just the natural progression of urban development and market forces. But sitting across from Maya, watching pain and anger flash across her features as she thought about children he'd never met being displaced from homes he'd never seen, Adrian found the answer had changed. Yes, he said. It matters now. Now, Maya repeated. Why now? What's different? You, Adrian said simply. Meeting you. Hearing you talk about your students as humans instead of statistics. Realizing that every number in our spreadsheets represents someone's life, someone's home, someone's stability. Maya leaned back, studying him with an expression he couldn't read. So, what are you going to do about it? I've asked for a full impact assessment, alternative development scenarios that don't require displacement. He stopped, hearing how insufficient it sounded. I'm going to try to find a better way. Trying isn't enough for the families who'll lose their homes while you explore alternatives. I know. And if you can't find a profitable alternative, if the choice comes down to the deal or those families, what then? Adrian met her eyes, seeing the challenge there, the test she was setting before him. Then I walk away from the deal. Just like that? You'd sacrifice that kind of profit for doing the right thing, Adrian finished. Yes. Maya studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I hope you mean that. Because it's easy to make promises in a coffee shop. It's harder when you're in a boardroom full of people expecting you to prioritize profit. I know, Adrian said again. But I'm going to try. Not just try, I'm going to do it. She softened slightly. I believe you want to. I'm just not sure you realize what it's going to cost you. Maybe it's time I started paying attention to what things actually cost, Adrian said, beyond the dollar amount. Maya's watch beeped and she glanced at it with obvious reluctance. I have to get back. Can I drive you? My car's at school. I just walked over. She stood, gathering her things. But thank you. For the coffee. For the conversation. She paused, searching for words. For being willing to see people instead of just opportunities. They walked back to the school together, slow steps that felt like reluctance on both sides. When they reached the fence, Maya turned to face him. Can I see you again? Adrian asked before he could second-guess the question. You want to see me again? Maya said, not quite a question. Very much. She considered this, her expression thoughtful. Why? We're from completely different worlds, Adrian. You drive a car worth more than I'll make in 5 years. You make decisions about developments that reshape neighborhoods while I'm trying to help one kid learn to read. What exactly do you think happens here? I think, Adrian said carefully, that you're the first person in longer than I can remember who's made me want to be better. Who's shown me what it looks like to care about something beyond profit margins and quarterly returns. Who's reminded me that success without humanity is just expensive emptiness. Maya's expression shifted, something vulnerable flickering across her features. That's a lot of weight to put on someone you barely know. I know. And I'm not asking you to fix me or save me or be responsible for my choices. I'm just asking for the chance to know you better, to learn from you, to maybe figure out who I could be if I stopped hiding behind spreadsheets and started engaging with the world as it actually is. And what do I get out of this? Maya asked, but her tone was gentle, curious rather than defensive. Honestly? Probably more complications than benefits. My life is messy in ways that aren't obvious from the outside. I have a son who needs attention I haven't given him, business obligations that will push back hard against any changes I try to make, and a complete lack of experience being the kind of person who shows up unannounced because something feels right. You're really selling this, Maya said, but she was smiling. I'm being honest. You asked for truth, so the truth is, I don't know what this is or where it goes. But I know that yesterday I was going through motions in a life that looked successful and felt empty, and today I'm standing outside an elementary school asking a woman I barely know for permission to disappoint her in person rather than through my absence. Maya laughed, real and surprised. That might be the strangest pitch anyone's ever made. Is it working? She pretended to consider, then said, Saturday. There's a community center over on Maple Street that does a monthly dinner for neighborhood families. I volunteer there. If you want to see my world, that's part of it. Helping serve food to people who are struggling, talking to families who are doing their best with what they have. No suits, no business talk, just actual human connection. What time? 5 o'clock. And Adrian? She touched his arm lightly. We're something you don't mind getting dirty. We're usually understaffed, and everyone pitches in with everything. I'll be there, Adrian promised. He watched her walk back into the school, her figure disappearing through doors that needed new paint, into a building that probably needed new everything. Then he returned to his car, to his leather seats and climate control, and sat there processing what he'd just agreed to. Saturday at a community center, serving food to struggling families, engaging with the kind of poverty and need his entire life had been designed to insulate him from. He should be terrified. Instead, he felt something like anticipation. Adrian drove back to his office, where Jennifer greeted him with barely concealed concern and a stack of messages that apparently couldn't wait. He dealt with them mechanically, his mind only half engaged, the other half replaying Maya's words about choosing yourself even when it meant starting over with nothing. At 6:30, he called it quits, unheard of for him, who regularly worked until 9 or 10. He drove to his penthouse, where everything was exactly as he'd left it that morning, perfectly maintained by a service he paid handsomely to keep his life running smoothly without requiring his actual participation. The apartment was beautiful, empty, silent. Adrian stood at the window looking out over the city, his city, the one he'd conquered through intelligence and ruthlessness and the willingness to see opportunity where others saw only risk. He thought about Maya's third-floor window, about the view she had of this same city from an entirely different angle. Then he did something he'd never done before. He called his son. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice bright with surprise. Daddy? Hey, buddy. I wanted to hear about your day. The pause that followed was long enough to hurt. When had he last called just to talk, without agenda or schedule? Really? Marcus asked, cautious hope evident even through the phone. Really? Tell me everything. And for the next 40 minutes, Adrian listened to his 7-year-old son describe his day with the kind of attention he usually reserved for multi-million-dollar negotiations. He heard about recess politics and math problems and the injustice of early bedtimes. He learned that Marcus's favorite color was orange because it was sunny, but not trying too hard. that he wanted to be a veterinarian when he grew up, and that his best friend's name was Ethan, and they were planning to build a treehouse in the summer. 40 minutes of information Adrian should have known. Would have known if he'd been paying attention to the small human he'd helped create instead of the empire he'd chosen instead. "Daddy," Marcus said when they were winding down, "are you really coming to my play?" "I promise," Adrian said, his throat tight. "I wouldn't miss it." "Okay," Marcus said, and Adrian could hear the smile in his voice. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, buddy, so much." After they hung up, Adrian sat in his perfect apartment and thought about the different ways a life could be measured. By profit or by presence. By achievement or by connection. By the respect of colleagues who barely knew him or the trust of a child who desperately wanted to. His phone buzzed with emails, urgent matters that apparently couldn't wait until morning. He ignored them. Instead, Adrian pulled up his calendar and began rearranging. The investor reception moved. Morning meetings condensed. Evening obligations reconsidered. He was carving out space for something new, something that didn't fit neatly into spreadsheets or strategic plans. He was choosing happiness, or at least taking the first stumbling steps toward understanding what that might look like. And on Saturday, he would show up at a community center on Maple Street, ready to engage with a world he'd spent his entire adult life avoiding, ready to learn what it meant to be human again. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made the city look almost forgiving. Adrian stood in front of his closet at 4:15 in the afternoon, staring at rows of suits and designer casual wear that suddenly seemed completely inappropriate. Maya had said to wear something he didn't mind getting dirty. Everything he owned was either worth thousands of dollars or looked like it was. Finally, he settled on the oldest jeans he could find. Still designer, but at least they'd been worn enough to lose some of their rigidity, and a plain navy sweater. Looking at himself in the mirror, he barely recognized the person staring back. Without the armor of expensive tailoring, he looked younger, less certain, more human. He arrived at the Maple Street Community Center at 4:55, parking his Mercedes 3 blocks away where it wouldn't stand out quite so conspicuously. The building itself was cheerfully worn, its brick facade decorated with a mural of diverse hands reaching toward a painted sun. Through the windows, Adrian could see people moving around, setting up tables, arranging chairs. He took a breath and went inside. The interior was a single large room with a kitchen area at one end and a small stage at the other. Folding tables lined the walls, already being covered with paper tablecloths by volunteers of various ages. The air smelled like coffee and something savory, cooking in industrial-sized pots. Conversation filled the space, not the polished exchanges of his usual environments, but genuine, overlapping voices discussing everything from recipes to sports to someone's upcoming surgery. Adrian stood just inside the door, suddenly aware of how completely out of place he was. "You came." He turned to find Maya approaching, her hair pulled back in a practical braid, wearing jeans even more worn than his, and a t-shirt that proclaimed, "Teachers change the world one student at a time." She looked pleased and surprised in equal measure. "I said I would," Adrian replied. "People say a lot of things." Maya gestured around the room. "Welcome to organized chaos. Come on, I'll introduce you to Linda. She runs this operation and will put you to work immediately." She led him toward the kitchen area, where a woman in her 60s was directing volunteers with the authority of a general commanding troops. Linda was short, round, with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Linda, this is Adrian. He's here to help." Linda looked him up and down, her assessment swift and thorough. "You ever served food before?" "No," Adrian admitted. "Wash dishes?" "Not in a long time." "Chopped vegetables?" "I have a chef." Linda's eyebrows rose, and she glanced at Maya with an expression that clearly said, "Where did you find this one?" But when she turned back to Adrian, her voice was brisk rather than dismissive. "Okay, Adrian, who has a chef, we're feeding about 150 people tonight, and we're short 3 volunteers. You willing to learn?" "Yes." "Can you follow instructions?" "Yes." "Then you're with Danny on setup. Danny!" She called out to the teenager struggling with a stack of folding chairs. "Show our newcomer how we arrange the tables. Adrian, you do what Danny says. Understand?" "Understood." Danny turned out to be 17, all elbows and enthusiasm, with the kind of easy confidence that came from knowing exactly where he belonged. He showed Adrian how to arrange the chairs in clusters that allowed for conversation, how to position the serving tables for efficient flow, where to put the water stations and napkin dispensers. "You're Maya's friend?" Danny asked as they worked. Yes, I suppose I am. She's cool. Helped my sister when she was struggling in school. Mrs. Carter doesn't give up on people." Danny positioned another chair with practiced ease. "So what do you do?" The question shouldn't have felt complicated. "I work in finance." "Like bank stuff?" "Investment capital. Helping businesses grow." "That sounds boring," Danny said with the casual honesty of youth. Adrian found himself laughing. "Sometimes it is." They worked for the next 40 minutes, Adrian following Danny's lead and trying not to think about how his back was already protesting the unfamiliar physical labor. Around them, the community center transformed from empty space to welcoming gathering place. Volunteers moved with practiced efficiency, calling out to each other, solving problems, creating something functional and warm from folding furniture and paper goods. At 5:30, Linda rang a bell and conversation quieted. "Doors open in 15 minutes, people. Let's do a final check. Serving stations ready?" A chorus of affirmatives. "Beverages stocked?" "Good to go." Dessert table?" "Ready." "Excellent. Remember, everyone who walks through that door gets a smile, gets respect, gets treated like family. We're not here to judge, we're here to serve." "Questions?" Silence. "Then let's feed some people." The doors opened and families began filtering in. Adrian positioned himself at a serving station, large spoon in hand, ready to dish out what Linda had identified as chicken casserole. Maya was 2 stations down, ladling soup, greeting each person by name with genuine warmth. The first person in Adrian's line was a woman in her 40s, 3 children clustered around her legs. "First time?" she asked, noting his obvious uncertainty. "That obvious?" She smiled, tired but kind. "You'll get the hang of it. Just don't be stingy with the portions. We've been looking forward to this all week." Adrian served her a generous helping, then did the same for her children, who thanked him with the earnest politeness of those who'd been taught that gratitude mattered. He watched them move down the line, collecting vegetables and bread and soup, before finding seats at one of the tables he'd arranged. The line continued. An elderly man with unsteady hands, a teenage girl with a baby on her hip who couldn't have been more than 16 herself. A family of 6 speaking Spanish, the parents translating for their children. Each person receiving food that was probably better than what they'd have at home, if they had food at home at all. Adrian had read statistics about poverty, about food insecurity, about the growing gap between wealthy and struggling. But statistics were abstract, sanitized. This was real. The woman who apologized for taking 2 rolls because her kids hadn't eaten since school lunch yesterday. The man who asked quietly if there would be leftovers because his disability check hadn't come through yet. The grandmother who blessed Linda with tears in her eyes because this meal meant she could use her limited funds for her grandchildren's medicine instead. These were the people his Riverside development would displace. These were the lives that existed behind the numbers in his spreadsheets. "You okay?" Maya appeared beside him during a brief lull in the line, her expression concerned. "I'm seeing things I should have seen years ago," Adrian said quietly. Before Maya could respond, a small voice called out, "Mrs. Carter!" A boy of about 8 came running over, one of Maya's students, Adrian realized, recognizing him from her descriptions. "Jamal." "Hi, sweetheart." Maya's whole face lit up as she knelt down to his level. "How are you doing?" "Good. Grandma's here too. She's getting food." He pointed toward the line, where an elderly woman was making her slow way forward. "That's wonderful. Have you been helping her?" "Uh-huh. I carried the heavy stuff at the store yesterday, and I read her the letters from the mailbox because her eyes get tired." "You're such a good helper." Maya glanced up as Jamal's grandmother reached them, and Adrian watched her expression shift into something more complicated, affection mixed with concern. "Mrs. Washington, it's good to see you." "Maya, honey." The woman's voice was warm but weary. "This is the highlight of our month, you know that." "How are you feeling? Did you get to see the doctor about your knee?" Mrs. Washington waved a dismissive hand. "Can't afford it, and it's not bad enough for the emergency room. We manage." Maya's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice light. Well, you make sure to take some of that chicken home. Linda always makes extra. Adrian watched this exchange, saw the way Maya touched the older woman's arm with genuine affection, the way Jamal beamed up at his teacher with obvious adoration. Then Mrs. Washington's eyes found him, and he saw her making the same calculation everyone here probably made when they encountered someone new. Friend or threat, safe or dangerous, someone who understood or someone who judged. Mrs. Washington, this is my friend Adrian, Maya said. He's helping out tonight. Pleased to meet you, Adrian said, extending his hand. Mrs. Washington shook it, her grip weak but her gaze sharp. Friend of Maya's is welcome here. You treat her right? The question was pointed, protective, and Adrian felt the weight of this woman's fierce care for someone who'd shown kindness to her grandson. I'm trying to, he said honestly. She studied him a moment longer, then nodded. Good. Come on, Jamal. Let's get our food and let these folks work. Adrian returned to serving, but his mind was racing. This was where Jamal lived. This was the community that would be destroyed if the Riverside development proceeded as planned. Not statistics, not abstractions, but this actual child and his actual grandmother who couldn't afford a doctor and relied on monthly community dinners to stretch their food budget. The evening continued. Adrian served until his arm ached, then helped clear tables, wash dishes, wipe down surfaces. He worked alongside people who did this every month, whose commitment to their neighbors was evident in every efficient movement, every warm greeting, every extra portion slipped to someone who looked particularly hungry. Around 7:30, Linda called another brief meeting of volunteers. Good work, everyone. We're at that wonderful chaos point where everyone's fed and socializing. Those of you who can stay for cleanup will start around 8. Those who need to go, you've already done your part. Thank you. Adrian stayed. He found himself washing dishes alongside a man named Carlos who worked construction and came here on his one free Saturday evening a month because, as he put it, I remember when my family needed this kind of help. Now I can give back. How long have you been volunteering? Adrian asked, passing him another wet plate to dry. 3 years now, since I got steady work. Carlos stacked the plate carefully. You new to this? Very new. What made you start? Adrian glanced across the room to where Maya was wiping down tables, laughing at something one of the other volunteers had said. Someone reminded me that there's more to life than what I'd been measuring. Carlos followed his gaze and grinned. Maya? Yeah, she has that effect. Good people. Real, you know? Not like those folks who show up once a year to feel good about themselves and then disappear. The observation landed with uncomfortable accuracy. How many charity galas had Adrian attended, writing checks that meant nothing to his bottom line, performing generosity for tax benefits and social capital? I want to be different than that, Adrian said. Then keep showing up, Carlos said simply. That's the only thing that matters, showing up consistently. By 8:30, the community center was clean, the leftover food distributed to families who needed it most, the volunteers gathering their things and saying their goodbyes. Maya found Adrian as he was folding the last of the chairs, her expression soft with something he couldn't quite name. You stuck around, she said. You asked me to come see your world. I wanted to see all of it. And? Adrian set down the chair and turned to face her fully. And I've spent my entire adult life insulated from reality. I've made decisions about communities without ever setting foot in them, about people without ever meeting them. I've measured value in profit margins while actual human value was invisible to me. That's a pretty heavy realization to have over chicken casserole. It needed to happen. Adrian looked around the now empty room. Jamal, your student, his grandmother. That's where the Riverside development would displace them, isn't it? Maya's expression grew guarded. Yes. Monday morning, I'm killing that deal. She stared at him. What? The Riverside development. I'm pulling my firm's involvement completely. Adrian, you can't just... I can. I will. He met her eyes steadily. You were right when you said trying isn't enough. Those families don't have time for me to explore alternatives while their homes are at risk. So I'm making the decision now. Vale Capital won't be part of displacing people who are already struggling. Maya's eyes shimmered, and she looked away quickly, composing herself. Do you understand what that's going to cost you? Professionally, I mean. Your partners, your investors will be angry, some will leave, the business will take a hit. Adrian shrugged. But you asked me what would make me happy. And I'm starting to realize that happiness isn't going to come from another successful deal. It's going to come from being able to look at myself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. Maya started again. That's a hell of a decision to make based on one evening serving food. It's not based on one evening. It's based on finally seeing clearly. You showed me that. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. I don't want to be responsible for you blowing up your life, Adrian. You're not. I'm choosing this. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm choosing what's right over what's profitable. Linda approached before Maya could respond, keys jangling in her hand. Time to lock up, folks. Maya, you have your friend sorted? Yeah, Linda. Thank you for letting him help tonight. He did good work. You're welcome back any time, Adrian. Thank you. I'd like that. They walked out into the cool evening air, the street quiet now, most of the volunteers already dispersed. Adrian's car was still 3 blocks away, and Maya's was in the opposite direction. Let me drive you, Adrian offered. It's literally 6 blocks. Then let me walk with you. Maya studied him for a moment, then nodded. Okay. They walked in comfortable silence at first, the streetlights creating pools of amber warmth in the growing darkness. The neighborhood was quiet but alive. Music drifting from open windows, the distant sound of children playing, the smell of someone's dinner cooking. Can I ask you something? Maya said finally. Anything. Why finance? You said you wanted to be an architect once. What changed? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, searching for honesty. My father. He was a banker, very traditional, very focused on legacy and stability. When I told him I wanted to study architecture, he sat me down and explained that art was a hobby for people who could afford to fail, and I couldn't afford to fail. Our family name meant something. I had responsibilities. That's a lot of pressure for a kid. He wasn't wrong, though. I was good at finance, natural talent for seeing patterns, understanding risk, predicting market movements. By the time I was 24, I was making more money than most people see in a lifetime. By 30, I was running my own firm. Success validated his vision. But it didn't make you happy. No, Adrian admitted. It made me successful. I confused the two for a very long time. Maya's fingers brushed against his, tentative. Adrian caught her hand and they continued walking like that, hands loosely intertwined, a gesture that felt both significant and natural. What happened to your wife? Maya asked gently. Marcus's mother. You said she died, but if it's too hard to talk about, no, I should talk about it more than I do. Adrian took a breath. Her name was Catherine. We met in college, got married too young, had Marcus when we were still figuring out who we were individually. She was brilliant, biochemistry researcher, passionate about her work. We were both so focused on our careers that we barely saw each other, even when we were married. And then one random Tuesday, she was driving home from the lab, and a drunk driver ran a red light. Maya's hand tightened on his. I'm so sorry. Marcus was 2, barely old enough to remember her, which somehow makes it worse. I have all these memories of her, and he has almost nothing. Just stories I tell him and photographs he studies like historical documents. Adrian's voice roughened. And I threw myself into work because that was the only thing that made sense to me. Grief was messy and uncontrollable, but spreadsheets were logical. Deals had clear parameters. I could control the outcome of a negotiation, but I couldn't control the fact that my son was growing up without a mother. So you built walls. Walls, Adrian agreed. Very tall, very strong walls. And then you offered me a seat in a restaurant, and suddenly those walls felt less like protection and more like a prison. They reached Maya's building too soon, the same worn brick structure where Adrian had dropped her off after their first dinner. She turned to face him, still holding his hand. What happens Monday? She asked. When you tell your partners you're killing the Riverside deal? Honestly, I don't know. Best case scenario, they trust my judgment and we find other opportunities. Worst case, they vote me out, dissolve the partnership, I lose everything I've spent 15 years building. And you're okay with that? I'm terrified of it, Adrian corrected. But I'm more terrified of becoming the kind of person who values profit over people, who measures success by the size of his portfolio instead of the quality of his character, who reaches the end of his life with a fortune and no one who actually knows him. Maya reached up, her fingers gentle against his jaw. You're braver than you think. I'm not brave. I'm just finally paying attention. She smiled, sad and sweet. Sometimes that's the same thing. They stood there on the sidewalk, close enough that Adrian could smell her shampoo. Something simple and clean, nothing like the expensive perfumes he was used to. Everything about Maya was like that, he realized. Real, unadorned, honest in a way that made his carefully curated life look shabby by comparison. I should go, Maya said, though she didn't move. When can I see you again? You want to see me again? She said it lightly, but there was real vulnerability beneath the words. Even after tonight? After seeing how completely different our worlds are? Especially after tonight. Maya, you're teaching me how to be human again. How to see beyond balance sheets and quarterly returns. How to... He stopped, searching for the right words. How to care about things that matter. I'm not some redemption project, Adrian. You can't just... I know. He interrupted gently. You're not fixing me. You're showing me what it looks like to live with integrity, to make choices based on values instead of profit. That's not the same thing. Maya was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. Then she said, Marcus's play next Thursday. Would you want company? The question surprised him. You want to come to a second-grade play? I want to see what matters to you. And your son matters to you, or he should. So yes, I'd like to come, if that's okay. Adrian felt something warm expand in his chest. That's more than okay. Thank you. Text me the details. She rose on her toes and pressed a brief kiss to his cheek. And Adrian? Good luck Monday. You're doing the right thing. She was inside before he could respond, the door closing behind her with quiet finality. Adrian stood there for a moment, his hand rising to touch the spot where her lips had been, feeling like a teenager after a first date instead of a 32-year-old billionaire. The walk back to his car felt lighter somehow, despite the weight of what Monday would bring. He drove home through streets that felt less foreign now, seeing the city differently than he had just days ago. His penthouse was the same, perfect, expensive, empty. But instead of the usual restless dissatisfaction, Adrian felt something like purpose settling into his bones. He spent Sunday preparing, not the way he usually prepared for difficult meetings, with spreadsheets and projections and strategic talking points, but with honesty. He wrote out his reasons for pulling out of the Riverside deal, practiced saying them aloud until they felt true rather than defensive. He called Marcus and had another long conversation, this one about the play and his son's nervousness about remembering his lines. What if I forget what to say? Marcus asked, genuine worry in his voice. Then you take a breath and do your best, Adrian said. And afterward, no matter what happens, I'll tell you how proud I am that you tried. Really? Really? Being brave isn't about being perfect, buddy. It's about showing up even when you're scared. Adrian realized he was talking to himself as much as to his son. Monday morning came with the same precise timing as always, but Adrian felt different approaching the glass tower that housed Vale Capital. He'd spent 15 years building this empire, and he was about to potentially watch it crumble because he'd finally developed a conscience. The morning briefing was at 8. Adrian arrived early, finding his 3 senior partners already in the conference room, Rebecca, Tom, and Sarah, along with the full acquisitions team. They looked expectant, confident, ready to move forward with the deal they'd been cultivating for months. Adrian took his seat at the head of the table and didn't waste time with preliminaries. I've reviewed the Riverside Impact Assessment, he began, and I'm pulling Vale Capital out of the deal. The silence that followed was absolute. Rebecca recovered first. I'm sorry, what? We're walking away from Riverside. Adrian, we've invested months in this opportunity, Tom started. I'm aware. The projections show... I've seen the projections. I'm still saying no. Sarah leaned forward, her voice careful. Can you help us understand why? The numbers are solid, the market conditions are favorable, the investors are eager, because 200 families will lose their homes, Adrian said flatly. Because we'd be profiting from displacing people who are already struggling. Because I looked at the actual human cost of this deal, and I can't justify it. That's not our responsibility, Tom argued. We're an investment firm, not a social services agency. Our job is to maximize returns for our investors. Our job is to make money ethically, Adrian countered, and I don't consider displacing vulnerable communities to be ethical. Rebecca's expression was a mix of frustration and concern. Adrian, I respect the moral stance, but this sets a dangerous precedent. If we start making investment decisions based on social impact rather than financial viability, then maybe we become the kind of firm that doesn't have to justify our existence beyond our profit margins. Adrian met each of their eyes in turn. I've spent this weekend thinking about what kind of legacy I want to leave, and I don't want it to be a balance sheet. I want it to be something that actually matters. This is about that teacher, isn't it? Tom's voice carried an edge of disdain. The woman from the elementary school? Adrian felt anger flash through him. This is about me finally seeing clearly. Yes, Maya helped me see it, but the decision is mine. A decision that could cost us millions, Rebecca pointed out. Not to mention the investors who've already committed based on our recommendation. I'll handle the investors personally. I'll explain the decision, take full responsibility. If they want to pull their capital from the firm, I'll understand. And if all of them pull out? Sarah asked quietly. If this decision destroys Vail Capital? Adrian took a breath, feeling the weight of 15 years of work hanging in the balance. Then I'll have destroyed it for the right reasons instead of building it on the wrong ones. The meeting devolved into heated argument after that. Rebecca and Tom were furious, seeing the Riverside pullout as the beginning of the end for their aggressive growth strategy. Sarah was more measured, trying to find middle ground, suggesting alternative approaches that might satisfy both Adrian's ethical concerns and their investors' expectations for returns. By noon, they'd reached an impasse. Adrian held firm, and his partners realized he wasn't going to be swayed by financial arguments or threats about what this would cost the firm. We need to vote, Rebecca said finally. This is too big a decision for one person to make unilaterally, even if that person is the founding partner. Fine, Adrian agreed. Vote. The partnership agreement required majority approval for major strategic decisions. Adrian knew the outcome before the hands went up. 3-1 against pulling out of Riverside. The majority wants to proceed, Tom said, his voice carrying an edge of triumph. Democracy has spoken. Then I'm exercising my veto, Adrian said calmly. Silence. Your what? Rebecca asked carefully. Section 7 of the partnership agreement. The founding partner maintains veto authority over decisions that compromise the firm's ethical standing. I'm invoking it. Tom's face flushed red. That clause was meant for legal issues, for protecting us from actual criminal activity, not for making decisions about whether we profit from human suffering, Adrian interrupted. I'd say that qualifies as an ethical issue. This is insane, Tom said, standing abruptly. You're willing to blow up everything we've built for some idealistic fantasy about ethical investing? This is business, Adrian. This is the real world. I know exactly what world this is, Adrian replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. And I'm choosing to operate in it differently than I have been. Rebecca and Sarah exchanged glances. Then Rebecca spoke. If you're invoking the veto, we can't stop you. But you need to understand, this changes things. Tom and I are going to seriously reconsider our partnership in a firm that makes decisions this way. I understand, Adrian said. And if you decide to leave, I'll wish you well and help ensure a smooth transition. Just like that? Tom's voice dripped with disbelief. 15 years of partnership and you're willing to watch it end just like that? I'm willing to lose a partnership that's built on values I can't defend anymore, Adrian corrected. If that's the same thing, then yes. The meeting ended in tense silence. His partners filed out, leaving Adrian alone in the conference room with the weight of what he'd just done settling onto his shoulders. He'd kept his word to Maya. He'd chosen integrity over profit, and it might have just cost him everything. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of damage control. Adrian spent hours on calls with investors, explaining his decision with a calm he didn't entirely feel. Some understood. Many didn't. By 5 o'clock, 3 major investors had formally withdrawn their capital, representing nearly $40 million in committed funds. Jennifer appeared in his doorway, as he was ending yet another difficult conversation, her expression concerned. Mr. Chen from Pacific Ventures just called. He wants to schedule a meeting to discuss the firm's direction. That's the fourth request like that today. Adrian rubbed his eyes, exhaustion settling into his bones. Schedule them all for next week. Group meeting if they prefer. I'm not hiding from this. Sir, if I may, Jennifer hesitated, then continued. What you did today took courage. I've worked here for 8 years, and I've watched you build something impressive. But I've never been proud to work here until today. The words caught Adrian off guard. Jennifer, I'm just saying, not everyone thinks you made the wrong choice. She set a folder on his desk. These are the Riverside families I researched. I thought you might want to see who you helped today, even if they'll never know it. After she left, Adrian opened the folder. Inside were profiles Jennifer had compiled, addresses, family compositions, employment histories. Mrs. Washington and Jamal were there, along with dozens of other families whose lives would have been upended by a deal that looked perfect on paper. He thought about calling Maya, but decided against it. She was probably still at school, and besides, he didn't want her first knowledge of how the day went to come through a phone call where he couldn't see her face. Instead, Adrian did something he hadn't done in years. He left the office at 6 o'clock, drove across the city to the private school Marcus attended, and waited outside. His son emerged at 6:20 with his nanny, Mrs. Chen, a kind woman in her 50s who'd been with them for 3 years. Marcus's face when he spotted Adrian was worth every difficult conversation of the day. "Daddy!" He ran over, his backpack bouncing. "What are you doing here?" "I thought maybe we could have dinner together. Just us, if you want." Marcus's eyes went wide. "Really? Just you and me?" "Just you and me. What do you say?" "Yes. Can we get pizza?" Adrian glanced at Mrs. Chen, who looked equally surprised but pleased. "I'll take him home afterward. Thank you for today." "Of course, Mr. Vale. Enjoy your evening." They ended up at a pizza place 3 blocks from the school. Nothing fancy, just checkered tablecloths and a jukebox in the corner and the smell of melting cheese. Marcus ordered pepperoni and talked nonstop about his day, his upcoming play, his friend Ethan's new puppy, 100 small details that Adrian had been missing while building an empire. "Daddy?" Marcus asked around a mouthful of pizza. "How come you're here? Not that I don't want you here, I do, but usually you're at work." Adrian set down his slice, giving his son his full attention. "Because I realized I've been at work too much, and I've been missing important things, like having pizza with you." "Is something wrong?" The question was too perceptive for 7 years old, and Adrian felt a pang of guilt that his son had learned to associate his presence with crisis. "No, buddy. Actually, something's right. I'm trying to be better at being your dad, at being here for the stuff that matters." Marcus considered this, his expression serious. "Like my play?" "Exactly like your play. Which I'm definitely coming to, remember?" "And you're bringing Miss Carter?" Adrian blinked. "How did you know about Miss Carter?" "You told me on the phone. You said your friend Maya might come." Marcus took another bite of pizza. "Is she your girlfriend?" We're friends. Good friends." "But do you like her? Like her?" Despite everything, the confrontation with his partners, the withdrawn investments, the uncertain future of his firm, Adrian found himself smiling. "Yeah, buddy, I like her." "Cool. Is she nice?" "She's very nice. She's a teacher, actually, 3rd grade. "Like Mrs. Patterson?" Marcus named his own 3rd grade teacher. "Similar. She cares a lot about her students." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Mama would want you to have a girlfriend, I think. She wouldn't want you to be lonely." The words hit Adrian square in the chest. "You think about Mama?" "Sometimes. I don't remember her very much. Just feelings, kind of. And pictures. But Mrs. Chen says Mama loved us a lot, and she'd want us to be happy." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes were uncertain, checking to see if this was okay to talk about. Adrian reached across the table, covering his son's small hand with his own. "Mama did love us. So much. And you're right. She would want us to be happy. She'd probably also want you to eat your vegetables, which you've been avoiding. But," Marcus made a face but dutifully ate a piece of the bell pepper from his slice. "Do I get to meet Miss Carter before the play? Would you like to?" Yeah, I want to see if she's nice like you said. They finished dinner talking about the play, Marcus's role as a tree in a production about environmental conservation, and drove home together. Adrian helped with homework for the first time in months, read 2 bedtime stories instead of the usual one, and tucked Marcus in with a hug that lasted longer than usual. Daddy? Marcus's voice was sleepy. Thanks for pizza. Thanks for having pizza with me, buddy. Can we do it again? Every week, Adrian promised. Every Monday if you want. Just you and me. Marcus's smile was drowsy and content. Okay. Love you, Daddy. Love you too. Adrian stood in the doorway of his son's room for a long moment after Marcus fell asleep, watching the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. 7 years old. How many Mondays had he wasted? How many bedtime stories had he missed while chasing deals that didn't matter? Not anymore. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. How did it go? Adrian moved to the living room before calling her back. She answered on the second ring. Hey, she said. You survived Monday. Barely. Lost 3 major investors, probably lost 2 of my 3 partners, and may have destroyed the firm I spent 15 years building. Oh, Adrian, but I had pizza with my son, helped him with his homework, and tucked him into bed. So on balance, I'd say today was a success. He could hear the smile in her voice. That's a hell of a way to measure success. I'm learning from the best. Adrian settled onto his couch, the phone warm against his ear. Marcus asked if you're my girlfriend. What did you tell him? That we're friends. Good friends. Was that the right answer? Maya was quiet for a moment. What would you have said if you were being completely honest? That I don't know what we are yet, but I know I want to keep finding out. That you've changed something fundamental in how I see the world, and I'm not ready for that to end just because we've only known each other a week. A week? Maya repeated. Has it really only been a week? Since Tuesday night. 6 days. It feels longer, not in a bad way, just like you've been in my life longer than 6 days. Adrian's chest tightened with something warm. I feel the same way. So what happens now? With your firm? Honestly, I don't know. The partners are furious. The investors are pulling out. I might lose everything. He paused, then added, and I'm still sure I made the right choice. Even if it costs you your company? Even then. Maya, I stood in that conference room today and looked at people who've been my partners for years. And I realized we've never actually shared the same values. We shared profit motives. That's not the same thing. It's not, she agreed, but it's going to be hard rebuilding from this. Maybe I won't rebuild. Maybe I'll do something completely different. Like what? I don't know yet, but I have some ideas brewing. Speaking of which, would you want to have lunch this week? I want to run something by you. Mysterious. I'm free Wednesday. Wednesday it is. I'll pick you up at school. You're going to make a habit of showing up at my workplace, aren't you? Is that a problem? No, Maya said, and he could hear the warmth in her voice. It's actually kind of nice, being sought out, being worth the drive across town. You're worth a lot more than a drive across town. They talked for another hour about everything and nothing, her students, his childhood, the books they'd read, the places they wanted to travel. It was easy, comfortable, like they'd been having these conversations for years instead of days. When they finally hung up, Adrian sat in the quiet of his penthouse and felt less alone than he had in longer than he could remember. The rest of the week unfolded with surreal momentum. Tom and Rebecca formally requested dissolution of their partnership on Tuesday, effective in 90 days per their agreement. Sarah stayed cautiously supportive of Adrian's new direction, even if she wasn't entirely sure what that direction would be. Wednesday's lunch with Maya was at a small Thai restaurant near her school. Adrian brought a folder full of ideas he'd been developing. Not traditional investment opportunities, but something different entirely. What if, he said, spreading papers across the table between their pad thai and curry, instead of just avoiding harmful investments, we actively sought out beneficial ones? Community development projects that actually serve the people who live there. Affordable housing that doesn't displace existing residents. Small business loans for entrepreneurs who can't get traditional funding. Maya studied the papers, her expression thoughtful. Impact investing. It exists, but it's still pretty niche, because it's seen as less profitable. But what if we proved it could be both ethical and financially viable? What if we built a firm around the idea that doing good and doing well aren't mutually exclusive? You'd need investors who care about more than just returns. They exist. I've been researching. There's a growing movement of people who want their money to mean something, to create positive change while still generating reasonable returns. Adrian leaned forward, his enthusiasm building. I'm not talking about charity. I'm talking about strategic investments in communities, in people, in projects that actually build value for everyone involved instead of extracting it. Maya's eyes lit up. Like the Riverside neighborhood. What if instead of tearing it down and displacing everyone, you invested in renovating the existing buildings, preserved the community while improving the infrastructure? Exactly. Keep rents affordable, support the local businesses, create jobs for the people who already live there. It wouldn't generate 300% returns, but it might generate 50% while also improving hundreds of lives. Who would fund something like that? I would, to start. I'm liquidating my personal portfolio. Between that and the investors who are willing to stay with the firm under this new model, we have enough seed capital to prove the concept. Maya set down her fork, studying him intently. You're really doing this, rebuilding everything from scratch based on a completely different philosophy. I am, assuming I'm not completely delusional. You're not delusional, you're brave. Maybe a little crazy, but brave. She reached across the table, taking his hand. I'm proud of you. The words settled into Adrian's chest like warmth. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of him? Not impressed by his success, not envious of his wealth, but actually proud of who he was choosing to be? Come to the play tomorrow night, he said impulsively. Meet Marcus officially. See this part of my life. Are you sure? That's a big step, introducing someone to your son. I'm sure. He's already asked to meet you, and I trust you. That's... Adrian paused, recognizing the weight of what he was about to say. That's not something I do easily. Trust people. But I trust you. Maya's eyes shimmered. Okay, yes. I'd love to meet Marcus. Thursday evening arrived with the particular chaos of elementary school theater. Adrian and Maya met outside the school auditorium at 6:30, Maya looking nervous in a way he'd never seen her. What if he doesn't like me? She asked as they approached the entrance. He's going to love you. Also, he's 7. His approval criteria are pretty straightforward. Are you nice, and do you think trees are important environmental symbols? I can work with that. They found seats in the crowded auditorium, surrounded by parents with cameras and grandparents with tissues already at the ready. Adrian scanned the program until he found Marcus's name listed among the chorus of trees. There are a lot of trees in this play, Maya observed. Environmental conservation is apparently very tree-heavy. The lights dimmed and the production began, a charming, if chaotic story about a forest threatened by development and saved by children who convinced the adults to protect nature. The irony wasn't lost on Adrian. Marcus appeared in the third scene, wearing a brown costume with construction paper leaves taped to his arms. He delivered his single line, "We trees provide oxygen for all living things." With tremendous conviction and only minor hesitation, Adrian found himself grinning, pulling out his phone to record. Beside him, Maya laughed delightedly at the earnest performance, the slightly off-key singing, the genuine enthusiasm of children who didn't yet know to be self-conscious. When the play ended and the cast took their bows, Adrian applauded until his hands hurt. They waited in the lobby afterward while children found their families, and then Marcus appeared, still in his tree costume, his face flushed with excitement. "Daddy!" He ran over, then stopped short when he saw Maya. "Oh, hi." "Hi, Marcus. I'm Maya. Your dad invited me to see you perform." Marcus looked between them, then asked Adrian, "Is this Miss Carter?" "It is." "You were really good," Maya said, kneeling down to his level. "That line about oxygen, very important message. Trees are kind of the best." Marcus's reserve melted into a grin. "Did you see when Tommy forgot his line and just stood there? Mrs. Patterson had to whisper it to him from backstage." "I saw that, but you remembered yours perfectly." "I practiced a lot." Marcus looked up at Adrian. "Can we get ice cream to celebrate?" "Absolutely." "Miss Carter, would you like to join us?" "I'd love to." They ended up at a small ice cream parlor, Marcus between them in the booth, talking nonstop about the play, his classmates, the weeks of rehearsal. He was comfortable with Maya almost immediately, asking her questions about her students, telling her about his favorite subjects in school, showing her the drawings he'd made of his tree costume in the planning stages. "You're a really good artist," Maya said, studying the careful crayon work. "Have you thought about what you want to be when you grow up?" "A veterinarian," Marcus said immediately, "or maybe an artist, or a scientist who studies animals and draws them. Can you do all three?" "I think you can do anything you set your mind to," Maya replied seriously. "The world needs people who care about animals and art and science." Adrian watched them interact, something warm and almost painful expanding in his chest. Maya treated Marcus with the same genuine attention she gave everything. No talking down, no false enthusiasm, just real engagement with a small person's big ideas. "Miss Carter," Marcus said through a mouthful of chocolate ice cream, "are you going to keep coming around? Or is this just for the play?" The question was blunt, and Adrian saw Maya glance at him, uncertain how to answer. "I'd like to keep coming around," she said carefully, "if that's okay with you." "It's okay with me. I like you. You're nice, and you don't treat me like a baby." "You're not a baby. You're 7 and a very accomplished tree." Marcus giggled, and Adrian felt something click into place, a sense of rightness he hadn't known he was searching for. They dropped Maya at her apartment later, Marcus already drowsy in the back seat. She leaned into Adrian's window, her smile soft. "Thank you for tonight, for including me. Thank you for being someone I want to include." "He's wonderful, Adrian, really special." "He likes you. That means a lot." Maya glanced back at Marcus, then leaned in quickly and kissed Adrian's cheek. "Good night. Text me when you get home." "I will." Driving home with his son half asleep behind him, Adrian felt pieces of his life beginning to cohere into something that made sense. Not the life he'd planned, not the success he'd engineered, but something more real, more human, more worth having. Friday brought news he'd been expecting but still dreaded. Tom and Rebecca officially announced their departure to form their own firm, taking several junior analysts with them. The trade publications ran stories about the dissolution of Vail Capital's original partnership, speculating about internal conflicts and strategic disagreements. Adrian's phone rang constantly, reporters, curious investors, competitors sensing blood in the water. He ignored most of them, focusing instead on the work of rebuilding. Sarah proved invaluable. Together, they began reaching out to impact investors, mission-driven funds, organizations that prioritize social good alongside financial returns. The response was cautiously positive, people intrigued by Vail's pivot, but uncertain whether he was serious or simply rebranding after a public relations disaster. "We need to prove it," Sarah said during a Friday afternoon meeting. "Not just talk about ethical investing, but actually do it, show concrete results." "Agreed. I'm working on our first project." Adrian pulled up the plans he'd been developing all week. "Remember Riverside? I'm proposing we buy the buildings ourselves. Not for development, but for preservation and renovation. We keep the existing tenants, upgrade the infrastructure, support the local businesses, create a model for community-centered urban renewal." Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That's ambitious and risky. If it fails, we'll have failed trying to do something meaningful. But I don't think it will fail. I think there's a hunger for this kind of development, for proof that you can improve neighborhoods without destroying them." "You're betting a lot on that theory?" "I'm betting everything on it." By the end of the week, Adrian had assembled a preliminary plan. Purchase the Riverside properties at fair market value. Secure affordable housing credits and historic preservation grants. Bring in contractors who hired locally. Create a community advisory board to ensure resident input on all decisions. It would take years. The returns would be modest compared to traditional development, but it would work, he was certain. And more importantly, it would matter. Saturday evening, Maya came to his penthouse for the first time. Adrian had worried the opulence would create distance between them, but she simply looked around with interest and said, "This is beautiful, and also deeply impersonal. Where do you actually live?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, where are your things? Your books, your photos, the stuff that makes a place a home instead of a hotel suite." Adrian looked around his carefully designed space, all neutral tones and expensive furniture, and nothing that revealed who actually lived here. "I hired a designer. She created a sophisticated, timeless aesthetic. She created a showroom. Maya walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. You have one of the best views in the city and nowhere comfortable to sit and enjoy it. I never really thought about it. Because you were too busy working to actually live here. She turned back to him, thoughtful. What would you put in this space if it were just for you? Not for impressing clients or maintaining an image, but for actually living. Adrian considered the question. I used to love architecture. I'd probably have books about buildings, maybe prints of structures I admire. And photos of Marcus? I have hundreds on my phone, but none displayed. Maybe a comfortable chair by that window, somewhere to just sit and think without it being productive. So do that. Make this place yours. It was such a simple suggestion, but it struck Adrian as revolutionary. He'd spent 15 years building a life designed to impress others, and he'd never stopped to consider whether it satisfied him. They cooked dinner together, Maya teaching him to make a simple pasta dish, laughing when he overcomplicated the sauce, guiding his hands with patient instruction. They ate at his dining table that had never been used for actual meals, talking about their weeks, their plans, their slowly unfolding future. I'm scared, Adrian admitted over wine. I'm rebuilding my entire professional life based on principles I only just started following. What if I'm wrong? What if ethical investing doesn't work and I lose everything? Then you'll have lost it trying to do something meaningful, Maya said, echoing Sarah's words from earlier. That's not the same as losing it through carelessness or greed. There's honor in that. Honor doesn't pay bills. No, but neither does success that costs you your soul. She reached across the table, taking his hand. Adrian, you're going to be fine. Maybe not fine in this way you were before, with the empire and the wealth and the power, but fine in ways that actually matter. You'll be able to look at yourself in the mirror. Your son will know you. You'll sleep at night without that hollow feeling you described. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's hard as hell. But it's worth it. They moved to the couch after dinner, sitting close, Maya's head on his shoulder. The city spread out before them through the floor-to-ceiling windows, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, each one carrying its own weight of joy and struggle. Tell me something you've never told anyone, Maya said quietly. Adrian thought for a moment. Sometimes I'm terrified that Marcus will grow up and realize I was never actually present for his childhood, that I'll be old someday, looking back, and all I'll have are regrets about the things I missed while chasing success that didn't make me happy. So don't let that be true. You can't change the past, but you can change what comes next. I'm trying. This thing with you, with deciding to rebuild the firm around different values, with showing up for Marcus. I'm trying to be different. Maya shifted to look at him directly. You are different. The Adrian who sat down at my table a week ago was exhausted and lost. You're still figuring things out, but you're not lost anymore. You're choosing a direction instead of just following the path that was laid out for you. Because of you. No, she corrected gently. Because you were ready to see differently. I just happened to be there when you were finally willing to look. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, studying the woman who'd upended his entire existence with a simple invitation to share a table. Can I kiss you? Maya's smile was soft, certain. Yes. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Two people finding their way into something new. Then it deepened, became more sure, carrying the weight of everything unspoken between them, gratitude and desire, and the terrifying hope that maybe, finally, Adrian had found something real. When they finally pulled apart, Maya's eyes were bright, her lips curved in a smile that made Adrian's heart stutter. So, she said, this is happening. This is happening, Adrian agreed. We're really doing this, you and me, whatever this is. Whatever this is, Adrian repeated, though I'd like it to be something real and lasting and worth the complications it's going to cause. What complications? Well, for starters, my ex-partners are going to accuse me of throwing away my career for a woman I barely know. The investors I'm trying to attract are going to wonder if I'm thinking clearly or having some kind of early midlife crisis. And Marcus likes me, Maya interrupted. You saw how he was last night. Kids are good judges of character. Marcus does like you. But bringing someone into his life, into our life, that's significant. That's asking him to trust someone new when he's already lost so much. Maya's expression grew serious. I know, and I don't take that lightly. I would never hurt him, Adrian, or you. I know, I trust you. That's what scares me, how much I trust you after such a short time. Maybe, Maya said thoughtfully, time isn't the right measure. Maybe it's about intensity instead of duration. We've covered a lot of ground in a week. We have. I've made decisions that will reshape my entire career. I've started actually being present in my son's life. I've let someone see me without the armor I usually wear. Adrian pulled her closer. You've changed everything. You changed yourself. I just provided some perspective. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's presence, until late evening became early night. When Maya finally left, Adrian stood at his window long after her car had disappeared, thinking about the week that had passed and the future that was slowly taking shape. He'd lost partners, investors, the certainty of his carefully constructed path, but he'd gained something immeasurably more valuable, the possibility of a life that actually meant something, a life built on presence instead of absence, on values instead of profit margins, on connection instead of isolation. Sunday, he took Marcus to the park, pushing him on swings and playing catch and being fully present in ways he'd forgotten were possible. And Monday, he would begin the real work of proving that a different kind of success was possible, a kind of success measured not in dollars, but in impact, not in power, but in purpose, not in what he'd built, but in who he'd become. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened with a momentum that surprised even Adrian. By the end of the second week, Vail Capital had officially rebranded as Vail Impact Partners, with a mission statement that would have made his former self wince. Creating lasting value for communities while generating sustainable returns for investors who believe profit and purpose can coexist. Sarah proved to be more than just supportive. She was brilliant at the operational details Adrian had always delegated. Together they assembled a team of analysts who cared about more than spreadsheets, young professionals who'd been waiting for someone to prove that finance could be a force for good. The Riverside project became their flagship. Adrian spent 3 weeks in meetings with the current property owners, the residents, city officials, and nonprofit housing organizations. Maya came to several of the community meetings, sitting in the back and occasionally catching his eye with an encouraging nod when negotiations grew tense. It was during one of these meetings, in a community center much like the one where Maya volunteered, that Mrs. Washington stood up to speak. I've lived in Riverside for 43 years, she said, her voice carrying despite her age. Raised my own children there, now raising my grandson. We've heard promises before. Developers who say they care about us until the papers are signed and suddenly we're being displaced to make room for luxury condos we could never afford. Adrian felt every eye in the room turn to him. He stood, meeting Mrs. Washington's gaze directly. Mrs. Washington, I understand your skepticism. You have every reason not to trust someone like me. But I'm not asking you to trust my words. I'm asking you to hold me accountable to a legally binding agreement that puts residents first. He pulled up the document on his laptop, projecting it for everyone to see. Rent-controlled units that cannot increase beyond inflation for the next 30 years. Resident advisory board with veto power over major decisions. Local hiring requirements for all renovation work. And a commitment that no current resident will be displaced during or after the renovation process. And what do you get out of it? Mrs. Washington asked. Nobody does this out of the goodness of their heart. Modest returns over a longer time horizon, Adrian answered honestly, and the chance to prove that this model works, that you can invest in communities without destroying them. If Riverside succeeds, it becomes a blueprint for other neighborhoods. That's what I get. Proof that I can build something that matters instead of just something profitable. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Mrs. Washington said, I'll believe it when I see it, but I'm willing to give you the chance to prove it. That cautious endorsement opened the floodgates. Within a month, Adrian had secured the properties, assembled his renovation team, and begun the careful work of upgrading buildings while keeping families in their homes. It was messy, complicated, full of unexpected challenges that no spreadsheet could have predicted. It was also the most satisfying work Adrian had ever done. He showed up at sites in worn jeans and work boots, learning the names of the contractors, understanding the specific needs of each building. He met with residents to hear their concerns, adjusted plans based on their input, saw firsthand how thoughtful investment could transform spaces without erasing the communities that made them meaningful. Maya often met him after these site visits, waiting in her car near whatever building he'd been working on, ready with coffee and conversation. One evening, in late autumn, nearly 2 months after they'd first met, she picked him up covered in drywall dust, his hair white with powder. "You look like you aged 40 years, she said, laughing as he climbed into her passenger seat. "I feel like I aged 40 years. Do you know how much plumbing costs? Because I do now, in excruciating detail." Some poor billionaire learning about plumbing costs. Former billionaire, Adrian corrected. Current moderately wealthy person with a lot of capital tied up in affordable housing renovation. Maya pulled into traffic, heading toward her apartment. "How does it feel?" "Terrifying, exhausting, completely different from anything I've ever done." He turned to look at her, this woman who'd somehow become essential to his existence. "It feels right." "Good." She reached over, taking his dust-covered hand. "You're doing something important, Adrian. These families, they matter. You're proving they matter more than profit margins." They'd fallen into a rhythm over the past weeks. Dinners at her small apartment where Adrian learned to cook actual meals. Weekends at his penthouse, which was slowly becoming less showroom and more home. Sundays with Marcus, where Maya joined them for parks and museums and the simple pleasure of being together. Adrian's son had attached himself to Maya with the easy affection of children who recognize genuine kindness, and watching them interact never failed to make Adrian's chest tight with emotion he was still learning to name. Tonight, Maya had promised to make her famous lasagna, and Adrian had promised to not overcomplicate it with unnecessary additions. "Just follow the recipe," she instructed as they worked in her tiny kitchen, moving around each other with practiced ease. "Not everything needs to be innovated." "I was just thinking some truffle oil might—" "No, absolutely not. This is peasant food, and it's perfect as is." Adrian held up his hands in surrender. "Yes, ma'am." They cooked and talked, Maya sharing stories about her students, Marcus's reading breakthrough, Sophia's improving anxiety management, the small daily victories that made her job worthwhile. Adrian talked about the Riverside Project, about Mrs. Washington's grandson Jamal, whose grandmother would now have the stable housing and support she needed, about proving that a different model was possible. "Speaking of which," Adrian said as they sat down to eat, "I got a call today from a reporter at the Times. They're doing a feature on impact investing and want to profile the Riverside Project." "That's huge. National exposure for the model." "It is. It's also going to put everything under scrutiny. My motives, my methods, whether this is genuine transformation or just good PR after backing out of the original deal." Maya took a bite of lasagna, considering. "What are you going to tell them?" "The truth. That I met someone who helped me see the human cost of decisions I'd been making without thinking. That I realized success without purpose is just expensive emptiness. That I'm trying to build something that matters, even if it's harder and less profitable than what I was doing before." "You're going to mention me?" Maya's voice was careful. "Only if you're okay with it. I can keep you anonymous, just say someone I met, without details." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "You can tell them. I'm not ashamed of being part of your story. As long as they understand I didn't save you or anything patronizing like that. You saved yourself. I just happened to be there when you were ready to change." Adrian reached across the small table, taking her hand. "You were there, and you stayed. That matters more than you know. I stayed because you were worth staying for. Because you actually listened and changed and followed through. A lot of people talk about wanting to be different. You actually did it." They finished dinner and moved to her couch, the television playing something neither of them paid attention to. Adrian pulled Maya close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling her warmth against him, marveling at how completely his life had shifted in just 2 months. "I love you," he said quietly, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. Maya pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. "What?" "I love you," Adrian repeated, more certain now. "I know it's fast, and I know we're still figuring this out, but I love you. You've made me want to be better, to do better, to actually engage with the world instead of just profiting from it. You've given me back my son by showing me what presence looks like. You've—" Maya kissed him, stopping the words with gentle pressure. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "I didn't want to say it first, didn't want to pressure you or make this weird, but I love you. I love who you're becoming. I love watching you choose integrity over ease. I love seeing you with Marcus, seeing you covered in drywall dust, seeing you actually live instead of just perform." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, and the weight of what they'd admitted, until Maya's phone buzzed with a reminder about school the next day, and reality intruded on their perfect moment. "Stay," Maya said as Adrian began gathering his things. "Stay tonight. Actually stay, not just until late. Wake up here, have coffee with me, see what a normal morning looks like." Adrian thought about his pristine penthouse, his carefully maintained routine, the isolation he'd confused with independence for so long. Then he thought about waking up beside Maya, starting the day with someone who knew him, really knew him, and chose him anyway. "Okay," he said. "Yes, I'd like that." The next morning, Adrian woke to sunlight streaming through Maya's bedroom window and the smell of coffee brewing. She was already up, moving around the kitchen in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, her hair in a messy bun, looking nothing like the polished women he'd dated before and somehow more beautiful for it. "Morning," she said, handing him a mug. "Fair warning, I'm not a morning person, so conversation will be minimal until I've had at least half this cup." Adrian smiled, settling at her small kitchen table. "I'll just sit here and admire you in silence, then." Creepy, but I'll allow it. They had breakfast together, toast and eggs, simple and unhurried, before Adrian left to change and head to the office. The morning traffic was terrible, but he found himself not minding, thinking about the night before, about waking up beside someone who loved him, about the quiet domesticity of sharing breakfast. His phone rang as he pulled into his parking garage. Marcus's school. "Mr. Vale? This is Principal Morrison. Everything's fine, but we need you to come pick up Marcus. He's not feeling well." 15 minutes later, Adrian walked into the school nurse's office to find his son pale and miserable, a bucket beside his chair. "Hey, buddy," Adrian said, kneeling down. "Not feeling good?" "My stomach hurts," Marcus whimpered, "and I threw up in Mrs. Patterson's class." "Okay, let's get you home." Adrian signed Marcus out, carried him to the car when his legs felt too wobbly, and drove him back to the penthouse. He settled his son on the couch with blankets and ginger ale, canceled his afternoon meetings without hesitation, and spent the day doing something he'd rarely done before, being present for his child's illness. He read stories when Marcus felt well enough to listen, held the bucket when he didn't, checked his temperature, called the pediatrician for advice. And when Maya texted asking how his day was going, he sent her a photo of Marcus asleep on the couch, surrounded by stuffed animals and blankets. Her response was immediate. "Need anything? I can bring soup after school. We're okay. Thank you for offering. Call if that changes." Being sick is the worst. Marcus woke up around 4, looking slightly better, but still pale. "Daddy?" "Right here, buddy." "You stayed home from work?" "Of course. You're sick. Where else would I be?" Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "You never stay home. You always have to work." The words hit Adrian like a physical blow. "I know, I'm sorry, but that's changing, okay? When you need me, I'm going to be here. Work can wait. Promise?" "Promise." Marcus fell back asleep and Adrian sat there beside him, one hand on his son's back, feeling the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. This was what mattered. Not the deals or the dollars, but these moments of simple presence, of being there when his child needed him. The Times article ran 2 weeks later, a full-page feature with photos of Adrian at the Riverside site, talking with residents, reviewing plans with his team. The journalist had been thorough, interviewing everyone from Mrs. Washington to his former partners to Maya herself. Maya's quote made Adrian's throat tight. He didn't need saving. He needed someone to remind him that success without humanity is just well-decorated emptiness. He did the hard work of changing himself. I just showed him it was possible. The response was immediate and divided. Some investors were intrigued, calling to learn more about impact investing opportunities. Others dismissed it as naive idealism that would inevitably fail. The business press was skeptical, questioning whether Adrian's transformation was genuine or simply clever, rebranding after a deal gone wrong. Adrian didn't engage with the criticism. He was too busy with the actual work, the renovations that were now fully underway, the families he met with regularly, the model he was building one careful decision at a time. 3 months after that first dinner at Meridian, Vail Impact Partners announced its second project, a partnership with a nonprofit to create affordable housing for teachers in the city's most expensive neighborhoods. Maya cried when he told her, understanding the symbolism immediately. "You're making it possible for teachers to live in the communities they serve," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you know how rare that is? How many of my colleagues commute 90 minutes each way because they can't afford to live near their schools? I know, which is why this matters. Teachers, firefighters, nurses, essential workers who serve communities but can't afford to live in them. That's a failure of our system, and I want to help fix it." The project attracted significant attention. Mission-driven investors who'd been watching the Riverside development with cautious interest started committing capital. Adrian's model was working, not making anyone rich quickly, but generating steady returns while creating genuine social good. By spring, nearly 6 months after Maya had offered him a seat at her table, Adrian's life was unrecognizable from what it had been. Vail Impact Partners had grown to 12 employees, all passionate about the intersection of finance and social good. The Riverside renovation was 60% complete, with families settling back into upgraded apartments that preserved their community while improving their quality of life. His relationship with Marcus had transformed from distant to engaged, with weekly pizza nights and daily conversations and actual presence in his son's life. And Maya had become essential, not in a way that diminished his independence, but in a way that enhanced everything. She challenged him, supported him, loved him with an honesty that made him want to be worthy of it. One Saturday evening in May, Adrian took her to Meridian, the restaurant where they'd met, where she'd changed everything with a simple offer of kindness. "I haven't been back here since that night," Maya said as they were seated. Not at separate tables this time, but together, by the same window where Adrian had sat alone waiting for a date who never arrived. "Neither have I. I wanted to, though. I wanted to come back here with you and see how different everything looks now." They ordered salmon for both of them, echoing that first shared meal, and talked about the past 6 months, about all that had changed and all that was still unfolding. "I've been thinking," Adrian said as dessert arrived, "about the future, about what I want it to look like. And I want it to look like this. You and me and Marcus, building something real together. I want to keep growing Vail Impact Partners, keep proving that finance can be a force for good. I want to be present for my son's childhood instead of just funding it. I want to wake up beside you and make terrible coffee together and argue about whether truffle oil belongs in peasant food." Maya laughed, tears already forming. "It absolutely doesn't." "I know, but I want to argue about it anyway, for the rest of my life, if you'll let me." Adrian pulled a small box from his pocket, setting it on the table between them. Maya stared at it, her hand covering her mouth. "I know it's only been 6 months," Adrian said. "I know that by any conventional measure, this is too fast. But Maya, you changed my entire life in one evening. You saw through all the armor I wore and reminded me what it meant to be human. You've loved me at my worst and celebrated me at my best, and I cannot imagine facing any future that doesn't include you." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, elegant without being ostentatious, beautiful without being showy, very much like Maya herself. "Maya Carter, will you marry me?" Maya was crying openly now, nodding before she could speak. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." Adrian slid the ring onto her finger, and then they were both standing, embracing in the middle of the restaurant while other diners watched with indulgent smiles. The same restaurant where Adrian had sat alone, hollow and lost, now witnessed his transformation into something whole. "I love you," Maya whispered against his chest. "I love who you've become, who you're still becoming." "I love you," Adrian replied. "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for staying." They sat back down, still holding hands across the table, and finished their dessert while making plans for a future that was nothing like Adrian had envisioned 6 months ago and infinitely better for it. The wedding happened 3 months later, small and intimate in the community center where Maya volunteered. Mrs. Washington sat in the front row beside Marcus, who served as ring bearer with tremendous gravity. Linda catered, refusing payment despite Adrian's protests. Maya's students made decorations, their handmade signs proclaiming Mrs. Carter is getting married, with the enthusiastic grammar of 8-year-olds. It was nothing like the society wedding Adrian's position would traditionally demand. It was perfect. "You look beautiful," Adrian said as Maya walked toward him, wearing a simple dress and carrying wildflowers, her smile outshining everything else in the room. "You look happy," she replied when she reached him. "Really, genuinely happy." "I am. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm actually happy." They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising not perfection, but presence, not wealth, but worth, not success, but significance. And when they kissed as husband and wife, the applause came from the community they'd built together. Residents from Riverside, volunteers from the center, colleagues from Vail Impact Partners, teachers from Maya's school, parents of Marcus's classmates. People who mattered, people who'd been seen and valued, who'd received kindness and given it back. The reception was potluck, everyone bringing dishes that represented their cultures and traditions. Adrian found himself dancing with Mrs. Washington, who told him firmly that he'd better take care of her favorite teacher or answer to her. "I will," he promised. "She saved my life." "She didn't save you," Mrs. Washington corrected, echoing Maya's own words. "You saved yourself. She just reminded you it was worth doing." As evening settled into night, Adrian stood outside the community center, watching through the windows as Maya laughed with her students, as Marcus showed off his ring bearer role to anyone who'd listen, as their combined communities mingled and celebrated. Sarah found him there, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. She'd stayed with him through everything, helping rebuild the firm into something that mattered. "Thinking profound thoughts?" she asked, handing him a glass. "Thinking about how completely my life has changed. 6 months ago, I was sitting in a fancy restaurant, stood up by a date, completely alone, even though I was surrounded by people. And now you have this. A wife who challenges you, a son who knows you, work that matters, a community that values you for who you are instead of what you're worth." "I almost missed it all," Adrian said quietly. "If Maya hadn't offered me that seat, if I just left like I planned, I'd still be going through the motions in a life that looked successful and felt empty. But she did offer, and you stayed. That's what matters. You chose to stay when you could have walked away." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the celebration continue inside. "The Riverside project is fully occupied," Sarah said. "Every unit filled, renovation complete, community thriving. We have 3 more projects in development. Investors are calling daily, and the Times wants to do a follow-up article on our first year's results." "And the returns?" 22% annual. Not the 300% you could have made demolishing the neighborhood, but solid returns while actually helping people. "The model works, Adrian. You proved it." Adrian thought about those early spreadsheets, about the 300% return that would have come at the cost of displacing 200 families, about Jamal and his grandmother, about all the people who would have become collateral damage in someone else's profit margin. "Success isn't measured in percentages," he said. "It's measured in whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back." Sarah smiled. "That's very philosophical for a guy who used to make decisions based purely on ROI projections." "I had a good teacher." Maya appeared in the doorway, beckoning to them. "Stop hiding out here. Marcus wants to dance with his dad, and I want to dance with my husband." Husband. The word still felt new, thrilling, right in a way nothing else ever had. Adrian took Maya's hand and let her pull him back inside, back into the warmth and noise and imperfect beauty of a celebration that honored who they'd become instead of what they appeared to be. He danced with his son, stepping on Marcus's feet and making him giggle. He danced with his wife, holding her close and feeling grateful for every choice that had led him to this moment. He danced with Mrs. Washington and Linda and even Sarah, celebrating not just his marriage but the transformation that had made it possible. Later, much later, when the celebration had wound down and Marcus was asleep in the car and they were driving home to a life they'd built together, Maya took Adrian's hand. "Happy?" she asked. "Happier than I knew was possible." "Even though you gave up the empire, the billions, the power?" I didn't give it up, Adrian corrected. I traded it for something better. I traded expensive emptiness for meaningful presence. I traded isolation for connection. I traded performing success for actually being successful in ways that matter. Maya squeezed his hand. I'm proud of you. I know I've said it before, but I'm so proud of who you've chosen to be. I'm proud of me too, Adrian said, and realized it was true. For the first time in my life, I'm actually proud of the person I am instead of just the things I've accomplished. They drove through the city they both called home now. Not his world or her world, but their shared world, full of communities they were helping to strengthen, people they were working to serve, a future they were building together, one careful choice at a time. Adrian thought about that Tuesday evening at Meridian, about sitting alone at a table waiting for someone who never came, about the loneliness that had characterized his existence even in the middle of success. He thought about the moment Maya's voice had stopped him, offering a seat with no agenda and no expectations, just simple human kindness. One choice, one moment, one person willing to see someone who'd become invisible even to himself. That was all it had taken to change everything. Marcus stirred in the back seat, mumbling something about being a tree again in his dreams, and Adrian smiled. His son knew him now, really knew him, not as a distant figure who provided resources, but as an actual father who showed up, who stayed, who chose presence over productivity. Maya rested her head on his shoulder at a red light, comfortable and trusting, and Adrian felt the weight of that trust as both responsibility and gift. This was success, not the billions or the empire or the reputation. This, being known and valued for who he actually was, having people who depended on him for more than money, building a life that mattered beyond quarterly returns and market valuations. This was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not always easy, but real and earned and worth every difficult choice that had led here. The light turned green. Adrian drove toward home, not the penthouse that had never felt like anything but expensive square footage, but the house they'd bought together in Maya's neighborhood, where Marcus had friends next door and the school was walking distance and community actually meant something, where he belonged, where they all belonged. And as the city lights blurred past the windows, Adrian Vale, former billionaire, recovering workaholic, newly transformed human being, felt the kind of contentment that no amount of money could buy. The contentment of a life well lived, of choices made with integrity, of love given and received without condition. All because one woman in a simple sweater had offered him a seat at her table, seeing not the silent king, or the billionaire, or the empire builder, but just a lonely person who needed kindness. And he'd chosen to stay. That choice had cost him everything he'd thought mattered and given him back everything that actually did. In the end, that was the only equation that mattered. Not profit versus loss, but emptiness versus meaning. Isolation versus connection. Performance versus presence. Adrian had spent 32 years optimizing for the wrong variables. He'd been measuring success by the wrong metrics. Now, driving through the night with his wife beside him and his son sleeping peacefully in the back, heading toward a home that felt like it deserved the name, Adrian finally understood what it meant to get the equation right. And the answer was simple, had always been simple, was sitting right beside him with her head on his shoulder and his ring on her finger. Love, purpose, presence. The only variables that ever really mattered, the only success worth having, the only life worth living. And it had all begun with a single act of kindness from a stranger who saw him when he'd become invisible even to himself. A poor woman offering a seat to a lonely billionaire. A simple invitation that changed everything. The seat that changed everything.